Hello, everyone. Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in Invincible as Thragg, Part 4. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
Mark stared through the window, his body frozen in place. The figure standing on their front lawn was unlike anything he had ever seen. Massive and imposing, with a mustache that would have looked comical on anyone else but somehow only added to the aura of absolute authority that radiated from him. But it was the coat that made Mark's blood run cold. The white fur draped over the giant's shoulders wasn't just any material. Mark recognized the pattern of the fur and the distinctive coloration. His mind flashed back to that day at Machine Head's headquarters, the alien warrior who had nearly killed him with casual ease. Battle Beast. The being whose raw power had made Mark feel like a child, whose strength had been so overwhelming that Mark couldn't even comprehend it. And this guy was wearing him as a damn coat. Mark. Debbie's voice seemed to come from miles away. Who is that? Mark couldn't answer. His legs trembled beneath him, and he felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. If this was the person Cecil had warned him about, Thragg, the Emperor of Viltrum, then they were all in danger beyond anything they'd ever faced. Mark. Eve's voice snapped him back to reality. What do we do? Mark turned, seeing his mother's frightened face, Oliver hovering anxiously beside her, and Eve's hands already glowing with pink energy. The sight of them, the people he loved most in the world, steeled something inside him. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white, forcing his voice to remain as steady as possible. Eve, Oliver, take Mom and go. Now. What? No way. Oliver protested, hovering higher with excitement despite the tension. If that guy's as strong as he looks, you'll need backup. Let me help. Mark, we're not leaving you, Eve insisted, stepping closer to him. Whatever this is, we face it together. I said go. Mark roared, his voice cracking with a rage neither of them had ever heard from him before. Get MOM out of here. Now. Without waiting for their response, Mark turned and launched himself through the wall of his home, splintering wood and drywall as if they were tissue paper. He rocketed toward Thragg with a primal roar, pulling back his fist for a strike that would have leveled a building. It never landed. With speed that defied comprehension, Thragg's hand shot out and caught Mark by the throat. Mark's punch hung suspended in the air, centimeters from Thragg's face. The Emperor hadn't even shifted his stance. Calm yourself, Mark Grayson, Thragg said. I am not here to harm you or your loved ones. Bullshit. Mark choked out, struggling against the iron grip around his neck. From the corner of his eye, he could see that Eve, Oliver, and his mother were still standing in the ruined doorway. G.O. He roared at them. Why are you still here? Run. Eve and Oliver exchanged a glance, then each took one of Debbie's arms. After a moment's hesitation, they began to lift off the ground. Thragg released Mark's throat, allowing him a single breath of relief before his massive hand clamped onto the back of Mark's head. With ease, he forced Mark down, pressing him face first into the lawn. Not hard enough to cause real damage, but with enough pressure to make escape impossible. No one is going anywhere, Thragg declared, placing his foot on Mark's back to keep him pinned. Again, the pressure was measured, just enough to immobilize, not to harm. With precise, controlled movements, Thragg swept his right arm through the air, then his left. The motion generated a cyclone of wind that encircled the property, creating a swirling barrier that trapped them all within the eye of the storm. Mom. Mark shouted, struggling futilely under Thragg's foot. Eve. Oliver. We're okay. Eve called back, having created a protective bubble around herself, Debbie, and Oliver. They hovered just above the ground, unable to escape through the howling winds. I assure you, Thragg said, his voice somehow carrying easily over the wind, I have not come to harm any of you. I am here to protect you. Protect us. Mark spat, his face pressed into the grass. By attacking us? I have not attacked you, Thragg corrected. I have merely prevented you from attacking me. There is a distinction. Who are you? Debbie demanded, her voice trembling but determined. I am Thragg, Emperor of Viltrum and Earth, though not this Earth. I come from another reality, one where your world faces a threat that I have come to protect you from." "What threat?" Eve asked, her shield still glowing protectively around them. "Angstrom Levy," Thragg stated. "A deranged version of him, the one from this dimension. He is gathering evil variants of Mark from across the multiverse, planning to unleash them on your world. They will reduce everything you know to ash." "That's impossible," Mark growled, still struggling beneath Thragg's foot. "I killed Levy. He's dead." "Evidently not," Thragg replied. "He is very much alive, and the threat he poses is imminent." "This is stupid," Oliver suddenly exclaimed, his voice cracking with excitement and anger. He hovered higher, breaking free of Eve's protective bubble. "Let my brother go." Before anyone could stop him, Oliver launched himself at Thragg, fist extended. "Hell yeah!" he shouted as he flew. His punch connected squarely with Thragg's face, and had absolutely no effect. Thragg didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move a millimeter. Oliver, however, recoiled with a cry of pain, clutching his hand. "Oliver!" Mark, Debbie, and Eve cried out in unison. "Ah!" Oliver gasped, tears springing to his eyes despite his efforts to appear tough. "My hand. I think I broke it." Thragg sighed, maintaining his hold on Mark while reaching out to catch Oliver. The boy struggled briefly, but Thragg's grip was gentle yet unbreakable. "Let me see," Thragg commanded, his tone softer than before. "Get away from him." Debbie shouted, her motherly instincts overriding her fear. "I mean him no harm," Thragg assured her. He looked down at Oliver, who continued to clutch his injured hand protectively. "Show me." Oliver glared up at Thragg, clearly weighing his options. After a moment, realizing resistance was futile, he reluctantly extended his hand. Thragg examined it carefully, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone of his size and strength. "A minor injury," he diagnosed. "The bones are fractured but will heal quickly." His eyes met Oliver's. "You are supposed to be a Viltrumite, and Viltrumites are strong. Your healing will begin soon." To everyone's surprise, Thragg then ruffled Oliver's hair with what almost seemed like affection. "You have courage, boy. That is good." Oliver blinked in confusion, clearly not expecting this response. Thanks." Debbie stepped forward, Eve's protective energy still surrounding her. "Why should we believe anything you're saying?" she asked, her voice steadier now. "What guarantee do we have that you won't harm us?" Thragg released Oliver, who immediately flew back to Eve's side, still nursing his injured hand. "I have nothing to offer but my word," Thragg replied, his gaze meeting Debbie's. "But that should be sufficient. I do not kill family." "Family?" Eve repeated, confusion evident in her voice. "What do you mean, family?" Thragg's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes shifted. "Nolan Grayson is my younger brother," he stated matter-of-factly. "That makes Mark and Oliver my nephews." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "What?" Mark whispered, his struggle momentarily forgotten. "You don't look anything like our dad," Oliver blurted out, his curiosity momentarily overriding his pain. "We are not siblings by blood," Thragg clarified, his foot still firmly planted on Mark's back. "We share the same father, Emperor Argal, the greatest ruler Viltrum has ever known. In my reality, Nolan is his biological son, lost during the Civil War and only recently discovered." "How old are you?" Oliver asked, his eyes wide with fascination. "Oliver." Debbie hissed. "Don't engage with him." Oliver ignored her, too curious to heed the warning. "Are you actually much older than Dad? Or is he the older brother? Am I like Dad or is Mark like Dad here?" The corner of Thragg's mouth twitched in what might almost have been a smile. "I am the older brother by millennia," he confirmed. "I was born even before the Civil War, as the strongest Viltrumite to ever live. It is why the Emperor took me in." "Took you in?" Mark managed to ask, still pinned to the ground. "Emperor Argal raised me as his son," Thragg explained, his voice carrying a hint of something almost like fondness. He recognized my potential and guided my development personally. Nolan is his blood, but I am his chosen. This is insane, Eve said, shaking her head in disbelief. You expect us to believe you're from another dimension where Mark is basically royalty? I expect you to believe the truth, Thragg replied simply. Whether you choose to do so is irrelevant to the facts. The threat to your world remains, regardless of your acceptance of my explanation. Mark had stopped struggling, his mind racing to process this bizarre information. If what you're saying is true, he said slowly, why not just tell us? Why attack first? Again, I did not attack, Thragg corrected again. I arrived. You attacked. I restrained you with minimal force to prevent harm to yourself and others. He looked down at Mark, his expression unreadable. In my experience, explanations are more effectively delivered when one's audience is not attempting to punch one in the face. Despite the tension of the moment, Oliver snorted with unexpected laughter. He's got you there, Mark. Oliver. Debbie admonished, though there was a hint of hysteria in her voice. If I release you, Thragg said to Mark, will you listen without further attempts at violence? Mark hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. Thragg removed his foot from Mark's back and stepped away, allowing him to rise. Mark stood slowly, rubbing his neck where Thragg had gripped him. The wind barrier, Eve pointed out, gesturing to the cyclone still surrounding the property. A precaution, Thragg explained. To ensure our conversation is not interrupted by well-meaning but misguided heroes who might arrive to rescue you. Like who? Oliver asked, his eyes wide with excitement. The Guardians of the Globe, perhaps, Thragg suggested, acting like he thinks they are alive, as he isn't supposed to be too knowledgeable about this world. Or any of your other allies who might misinterpret the situation. Mark dusted himself off, his eyes never leaving Thragg. So talk. What exactly is this threat, and why should we believe you? Thragg's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Watch your tone, boy. I have already tolerated a significant amount of your impudence. Do not test the limits of my patience further. The sudden shift in Thragg's demeanor sent a chill down Mark's spine. For the first time, he truly realized who he was speaking to, a literal emperor who rules God knows how many planets. Mark swallowed hard, instinctively taking a step back. I'm sorry, Mark said, his voice quieter. He straightened his posture and continued with more formality. Please, Emperor Thragg, could you explain the nature of the threat we're facing and why we should trust your word? The tension in Thragg's shoulders eased slightly, apparently satisfied with Mark's adjustment in attitude. Better. Respect costs nothing yet yields much. Angstrom Levy from your reality has spent, from what I know, months gathering evil versions of you from across the multiverse. Versions who chose conquest over protection, cruelty over compassion. He has promised them worlds to ravage if they help him destroy you first. Why would he do that? Debbie asked, her protective arm around Oliver's shoulders. Revenge, Thragg stated simply. From what I understand, in his damaged mind, he blames Mark for his condition and his failures. He seeks not just to kill him but to destroy everything he loves, to make him watch as his world burns. Mark exchanged a troubled glance with Eve. How do you know all this? A different Angstrom Levy, one from another reality, came to us seeking help, Thragg explained. He had been monitoring the multiverse and discovered this plot. He feared the consequences would spread beyond your dimension, threatening countless worlds. So you just decided to help? Mark asked skeptically. Out of the goodness of your heart? My motivations are complex, Thragg acknowledged. But primarily pragmatic. Multiversal stability serves Viltrum's interests. And... He paused, his eyes moving to Oliver, then back to Mark. As I said, I do not allow harm to family. This Mark and Oliver, being ones he actually respects for their courage and goodness, he gives them slight consideration as such. It's still surreal to me how Dad is supposedly your brother in your world, Mark said, shaking his head. In time, all will be explained, Thragg replied. For now, you must trust that I am here to protect you from a threat beyond your capacity to handle alone. And if we don't trust you? Eve challenged. Then you will die, Thragg stated with absolute certainty. Along with everyone else on this planet. The evil marks are numerous, powerful, and utterly without mercy. You cannot stop them alone. A heavy silence fell over the group as they absorbed this blunt assessment. Mom. Mark looked to Debbie, whose face was pale but seemed to have come to a decision. If what he's saying is true, she said slowly, we need help. And... She hesitated, studying Thragg's impassive face. He could have hurt us already if that was his intention. Debbie's right, Eve said reluctantly. As crazy as it sounds, his story explains Cecil's warning. And if Levy really is gathering evil versions of you, Mark, we're going to need all the help we can get. Oliver, cradling his healing hand, nodded enthusiastically. Plus, he's wearing that battle beast you told me about to run if I ever met him as a coat. That's pretty badass. Oliver. Debbie exclaimed, but there was a hint of resignation in her voice. Mark looked at Thragg, still wary but no longer openly hostile. If we agree to come with you, where exactly are we going? To the Global Defense Agency headquarters, Thragg replied. The others from my reality are there, including your father, or rather, his counterpart from my world. Dad's alive in your world? Mark asked, his tone full of complex emotions, having forced himself not to think about the fact his dad would be executed soon, as General Craig told him. Very much so, Thragg confirmed. And eager to see you, even if you are not precisely his son. Mark took a deep breath, exchanging glances with Eve, then his mother, and finally Oliver. Each nodded in turn, a silent agreement forming between them. All right, Mark said finally. We'll go with you. But I'm warning you, if this is some kind of trick. Even if it kills me, I won't let you get away with it. Deciding that he needed to say this, his need overriding his fear. It is not, Thragg stated with finality, letting the words go, knowing Mark meant no true disrespect but needed to get those words out. And soon you will understand the full magnitude of the threat we face. With a gesture, he dissolved the wind barrier surrounding the property. The sudden silence was almost deafening after the constant howl of the cyclone. Can you all fly? Thragg asked, again, acting within the illusion that he knows not too much about this world and is willing to take into consideration all possible differences, his gaze moving from Mark to Eve to Oliver. Mom can't, Mark said, moving to Debbie's side protectively. I will carry her, Thragg decided, approaching Debbie with measured steps to avoid alarming her further. Mark being too tired, and Oliver's hand being broken, while Eve herself is also still too mentally exhausted from everything, causing them all not to protest. Debbie tensed but stood her ground as the massive Viltrumite stopped before her. I won't drop you, he assured her, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. After a moment's hesitation, Debbie nodded. All right. With careful movements, Thragg lifted her into his arms, cradling her as if she weighed nothing. Stay close, he instructed the others. We will travel at a speed comfortable for all. Mark, Eve, and Oliver took to the air, hovering nearby as Thragg ascended with Debbie securely in his grip. Soon enough, they arrived at the GDA. The central conference room of the Global Defense Agency headquarters had never been designed to accommodate so many powerful beings at once. The reinforced walls and specially engineered furniture, built to withstand superhuman force, seemed almost inadequate in the presence of the assembled group. Thragg dominated the space without effort, his massive frame making even the oversized chair beneath him appear delicate. The battle beast coat draped regally around his shoulders, a constant reminder of his overwhelming power. He sat at the head of the table, the position of authority unquestioned by anyone present. To his right sat Amanda, the crimson cape with its distinctive white sash marking her as his chosen mate. Her expression was calm but watchful, studying the reactions of this world's inhabitants. Beside her, Roberta observed everything with analytical precision, her enhanced molecular manipulation abilities allowing her to subtly scan the room's occupants at the cellular level. Her eyes occasionally lingered on this world's Cecil, noting the differences in stress markers and cellular degradation compared to the Cecil she knew. Conquest stood behind Thragg rather than sitting, his scarred face set in its perpetual scowl as he surveyed the room with the wariness of a veteran warrior assessing potential threats. His massive arms remained crossed over his chest, his posture making it clear he was ready to act at a moment's notice. Nolan sat to Thragg's left, his familiar Omniman uniform a stark reminder to this world's inhabitants of what they had lost. His expression was complex, a mixture of curiosity and discomfort as he faced the family of his counterpart from this reality. Alternate Mark and Eve sat beside Nolan, their hands occasionally brushing against each other in subtle gestures of reassurance. Across the table sat this world's Mark Grayson, his posture tense and guarded. Unlike his alternate self, he wore civilian clothes, the remnants of the dinner date that had been so abruptly interrupted. Beside him, this world's Eve maintained a protective stance, pink energy occasionally flickering around her fingertips whenever anyone made a sudden movement. Debbie Grayson sat beside her son, her face pale but composed. She had not taken her eyes off Nolan since entering the room, studying the alternate version of her husband with an expression that shifted between pain, wonder, and caution. Oliver bounced in his seat beside Debbie, barely able to contain his excitement despite the gravity of the situation. His eyes darted between Thragg, Nolan, and the two versions of his brother, questions practically ready to burst from him. Cecil Stedman stood at the opposite end of the table from Thragg, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that mirrored the Emperor's authority, though on a distinctly human scale. His ever-present sunglasses concealed his eyes, but the tight set of his jaw revealed his unease. The good Angstrom Levy completed the assembly, standing slightly apart from the others. Unlike the deformed, insane version this world knew, he appeared perfectly normal, a dark-skinned man with an intelligent face and alert eyes that occasionally darted to the various dimensional monitors he had set up around the room. The silence that had fallen after the introduction stretched uncomfortably until Oliver could no longer contain himself. "So you're really my dad from another dimension?" he blurted out, leaning forward to stare at Nolan with undisguised fascination. "Do you have another me there? Am I cooler in your world? Can I fly faster? Do I have any other powers?" "Oliver," Debbie admonished gently, though her eyes never left Nolan's face. Nolan shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't have an Oliver in my world," he admitted, his voice softer than most in the room expected. "My Debbie and I never had a second child." Oliver's face fell slightly. "Oh, so I don't exist there." "No," Nolan clarified softly. "The circumstances for things to happen were different in our reality. Thragg's intervention changed many things." This seemed to reignite Oliver's enthusiasm. "So Uncle Thragg changed history? That's so cool. Is he really as strong as he looks? I mean, he didn't even flinch when I punched him, and I'm super strong." "Uncle?" Alternate Mark mouthed to his Eve, who shrugged with a small smile. Nolan glanced at Thragg, whose expression remained impassive, before answering. "The Emperor is the strongest being in our universe," he confirmed. "Possibly in any universe." Oliver's eyes widened with excitement. "So does that make me royalty too? Since Mark is your son and you're the Emperor's brother, does that make me a prince or something?" Debbie placed a restraining hand on Oliver's arm. "Oliver, please. This is serious." "But Mom, this is serious." Oliver protested. "If Dad is royalty in their world, that means I'm royalty too, right? That's pretty important information." Before Nolan could respond, Thragg's deep voice cut through the conversation. "Your enthusiasm is understandable, young one, but we have more pressing matters to discuss. The threat to your world will not wait while we explore the intricacies of imperial lineage." Oliver immediately straightened in his chair, his expression becoming serious. "Sorry, Uncle Thragg. You're right." The corner of Thragg's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly, the only indication that the familial title had affected him at all. Those who knew him best, Amanda, Roberta, Alternate Mark, and Eve, exchanged subtle glances, recognizing the minute softening in his demeanor. Cecil cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should focus on why you're all here," he suggested, his tone carefully neutral despite the tension evident in his posture. "Mr. Levy, you mentioned an imminent threat?" Good Angstrom Levy stepped forward, activating one of his dimensional monitors. The device projected a holographic display in the center of the table, showing what appeared to be a warehouse somewhere in this world Chicago. "This is happening right now," Levy explained, adjusting the resolution. "The evil version of me, your version, has been gathering his forces here for the past several hours. By my count, he's already assembled at least 15 evil versions of Mark from across the multiverse." The image zoomed in, revealing a disturbing sight, more than a dozen figures who resembled Mark Grayson, but with subtle or dramatic differences. Some wore variations of the Invincible costume in darker colors. Others were clad in armor that resembled Viltrumite battle gear. A few appeared almost demonic, their features twisted by whatever dark paths they had chosen. "My God," this world's Eve whispered, her hand finding marks under the table. "How long do we have?" Cecil asked, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. Levy adjusted the monitor again, checking readings that only he fully understood. "Based on the dimensional energy signatures, I'd estimate less than 6 hours before they're ready to launch their attack. Your Levy is still bringing in more marks from other realities." "Why so many?" this world's Mark asked, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the room. "If even one of these guys is as strong as me, they could do serious damage. Why does he need an army?" "Because he doesn't just want to kill you," Levy explained grimly. "He wants to destroy everything you love, everything you've ever tried to protect. He wants to make you watch as your world burns, knowing you were powerless to stop it." "And these other marks," Debbie said, her voice steady despite the horror in her eyes. "They've agreed to this? To destroy an innocent world just for revenge?" "They're not like your son," alternate Mark interjected, his expression darkening. "In their realities, they made different choices. Worse choices." "They're monsters," Levy added. Versions of Mark who sided with Viltrumite conquest in its worst ways, who embraced their heritage at the expense of their humanity. Original Mark's face paled slightly. "So they're all like what I could have become if I'd joined Dad?" "Some are worse," Levy confirmed. "Much worse." A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone absorbed this information. Original Mark stared at the holographic display, his expression a mixture of horror and disbelief as he confronted dozens of dark reflections of himself. "We need to call in the Guardians," Cecil decided, breaking the silence. "Black Samson, Immortal, the teen team, everyone we've got." "Will that be enough?" Debbie asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. "No," Thragg stated bluntly. "Your heroes, while admirable, cannot stand against this many Viltrumites. That is why we are here." "And we're supposed to just trust you?" Original Mark asked, his voice tight with tension. "How do we know you won't just conquer our world after helping us defeat these evil versions of me?" The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Thragg's gaze fixed on Original Mark. For a moment, no one spoke, the weight of the Emperor's attention almost palpable. "Your suspicion is logical," Thragg acknowledged finally, his tone neutral. "In your position, I would question as well. But consider this, if conquest were my primary objective, why would I announce my presence? Why bring allies who could corroborate your suspicions? Why not simply wait until your world was weakened by this attack, then strike when resistance would be minimal?" Original Mark had no immediate answer to this, his brow furrowing as he considered Thragg's words. "He's right, Mark," Cecil said reluctantly. "If they wanted to take over, there are more efficient ways than this elaborate rescue mission." "Besides," Amanda added, speaking for the first time, "you've seen what Thragg can do. Do you really think he needs help conquering a single planet?" Original Mark's eyes moved to Amanda, noting the crimson cape around her shoulders. "And who exactly are you? I don't think we have a version of you in our world." "I'm Amanda," she replied simply. "In your world, you might know me as Monster Girl." "Monster Girl?" Original Eve exclaimed, her eyes widening. "But you're adult." Amanda finished with a small smile. "Yes. Thragg provided technology that stabilized my condition. I can transform without aging backward now." Original Mark looked between Amanda and Thragg, clearly trying to piece together their relationship. The cape, the way she sat beside him, the subtle protectiveness in her posture. "Are you too?" he began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the question. "She is my mate," Thragg stated matter-of-factly. "The first of what will eventually be many, as required for the repopulation of the Viltrumite species." Original Mark's eyebrows shot up, and he exchanged a stunned glance with his Eve. "Okay, that's not what I expected." Oliver, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly burst out with questions again, not satisfied with not having his questions answered, just like any child. "So in your world, Dad, are you really royalty? Is that why Uncle Thragg called you his brother?" Nolan cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. It's complicated, Oliver. In our world, I was discovered to be the biological son of Emperor Argal, the greatest ruler in Viltrumite history. That makes me, technically, the heir to the imperial throne. So you're a prince? Oliver exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. That's awesome. Does that make Mark a prince too? And me? Oliver, please, Debbie said again, though her voice lacked conviction. She too seemed fascinated by this revelation. The imperial lineage is not our primary concern at present, Thragg interrupted again, his patience visibly thinning. We must prepare for the coming attack. Every moment spent in irrelevant discussion is a moment lost in preparation. Sorry, Uncle Thragg, Oliver said, immediately apologizing again, looking genuinely sad, causing Thragg's expression to once more soften as he nodded towards Oliver, who immediately took it as forgiveness and smiled once again. Mr. Levy, Cecil said, turning to Angstrom, perhaps you could elaborate a bit more on what we're facing and what resources we have available. Levy nodded, adjusting his dimensional monitors again. The evil marks vary in power and abilities. Some are merely corrupted versions of your mark, strong, but nothing you haven't seen before. Others have enhanced themselves through technology and perhaps other things, I can't say for certain. The multiverse is a big place. The holographic display shifted, showing close-ups of several particularly menacing versions of Mark. One appeared to be completely scarred, with veins protruding from his bald head, and then another, both in full white Viltrumite attire, though the other was not scarred, and there were subtle differences in the clothing. One marking one as a prisoner, the other as a true Viltrumite officer. The most dangerous, Levy continued, are those who fully embrace their Viltrumite heritage and receive training from their versions of Thragg or other Imperial commanders. They're faster, stronger, and more ruthless than your mark. How do we fight them? Original Eve asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Together, alternate Mark answered. Even the strongest individual can be defeated by a well-organized team. Which is why, Cecil interjected, I insist on activating every hero we have. Black Samson, Immortal, Adam Eve, Rexplode, Duplicate, Shrinking Ray, everyone. Still not comfortable with trusting his world in the hands of unknown people, no matter how strong. And just like the Emperor told you previously, that won't be enough, Conquest growled, speaking for the first time. The ancient warrior's scarred face twisted in what might have been a smile. But it will make for an interesting battle. Conquest, Thragg warned, his tone carrying a subtle rebuke. The warrior inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Apologies, Emperor. I merely observed that the local heroes lack the combat experience necessary for this scale of threat. That's why we're here, Alternative pointed out. To provide the experience and power they need. Original Mark had been silent during this exchange, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing his evil counterparts. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. I'm grateful for your help, he said, drawing everyone's attention. Really, I am. But again, you say you have no intention of conquering our world, but that's right now. What's stopping you from conquering our world after this invincible war is over? After changing your mind for some reason? What then? We go from preventing destruction to being slaves? How is that better? Alternate Mark opened his mouth to respond, but good Angstrom Levy beat him to it. Look, Mark, Levy said, his tone suddenly informal, almost confrontational, deciding that the best approach to this was through a bit more familiarity. I respect you, men. I really do. You're one of the few actually good marks in the multiverse. Hell, you're the only one who actually survived the confrontation with your dad without joining him or getting killed. That alone makes you worthy of respect in my book. He stepped closer to the table, his expression intense. But come on, men, does your world right now look like it's heading toward a good path? You try to do good, but honestly, you suck at being a superhero. Excuse me, Original Mark bristled. It's not your fault, Levy continued, holding up a hand. It's not because you're bad at it. It's because you're up against monsters. Monsters who, no matter if defeated, will cause the death of millions. And unlike wounds, which heal, those deaths can never be undone. The room had gone completely silent, everyone watching the exchange with rapt attention. How many will have to die until the Viltrum Empire stops their attempts to conquer your Earth? Levi demanded, his voice rising with emotion. Sure, this world's empire is not as big as Thragg's, which spans over thousands of galaxies, whereas this world hasn't left the Virgo cluster, but does that really matter? He began pacing, his gestures becoming more animated. There's still Viltrumites, and they're still numerous. Countless will die, and sure, if there was no other option, then it's good, a last stand against an evil tyrant, respectable, honorable, and praiseworthy. But there is an alternative here. Levi pointed at Thragg, his finger trembling slightly. This Thragg here is the only one who, in thousands upon thousands of dimensions I've observed, is a good Thragg. Yes, he's a conqueror. Yes, he has done evil. Yes, he destroyed planets and genocide species, but even more than that will die eventually if things remain the same. Original Mark's face had gone pale, but his expression remained defiant. So we should just surrender our freedom because the alternative might be worse? Do you even realize how messed up the multiverse is? Levi shot back, his voice cracking with intensity. How many worlds are out there suffering because of evil tyrants? Let me give you an example. He adjusted one of his monitors, bringing up an image that made everyone at the table flinch. It showed another Earth, another Mark and Eve, but in a scenario so disturbing that several people looked away, with Mark breaking her neck with a single twitch of his wrist. There's a world out there where Mark joined Nolan in wanting to conquer Earth, Levi explained, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. But because of their inefficiency, unlike Thragg here, who literally conquered his Earth in a single day without spilling a single drop of blood, they killed thousands upon thousands. Resistances formed. He looked directly at Original Eve, his expression grim. Your counterpart in that world was the head of the resistance. And you want to know what happened to her? That evil Mark, as I just showed you, paralyzed her from the neck down, and unlike his dad, who saw his Debbie as a pet, that Mark sees Eve as his damn flower pot. Both Marks and both Eves recoiled visibly at this, horror etched on their faces. He visits her in the hospital he arranged for her, Levi continued relentlessly, and does whatever he wants with her. Yes, whatever he wants. I think you understand what I mean. That's enough, Cecil said sharply, but Levi was beyond stopping now. So much suffering is out there, he exclaimed, slamming his fist on the table. There needs to be something done. Someone powerful, almighty, intelligent, wise, and compassionate when necessary, and a devil when necessary as well, and that's this Thragg. He pointed at the Emperor again, his eyes wild with a mixture of desperation and hope. It's been my quest for decades to find someone like him, someone who can fix this messed up multiverse we live in. Now, will you really oppose that? Let so much suffering continue because you think you'll be made into slaves and humiliated, when you'll actually be elevated, and everyone's lives will be improved? No more disease, crime, or hunger, all the problems of the world gone. Levi's voice dropped, becoming almost pleading. You should understand, the worlds always have rulers, be it out in the open like the Viltrumites or hidden in the darkness, who rule through wealth and cunning. And always will the evil do the unspeakable hidden in the shadows. It's naive to think one can stop that by not taking charge. He fixed Original Mark with a final, challenging stare. And if that isn't what you want, if you want to keep your conscience clean while letting suffering continue, then you might as well take off that costume, since you're no damn hero. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke, as Levi's words hung in the air like physical things, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Original Mark sat frozen, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and doubt. His Eve had placed a hand on his arm, but he seemed barely aware of her touch, lost in what he'd just heard. After what felt like an eternity, Cecil cleared his throat. I think, he said carefully, that we all need some time to process this. We have preparations to make, and clear heads will serve us better than heated emotions. He adjusted his sunglasses, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. I'll begin coordinating with our heroes. The rest of you should get some rest while you can. We'll reconvene in 2 hours to finalize our strategy. The meeting broke up with a palpable sense of relief, people rising from their seats and moving toward the exits in small groups. Thragg stood last, his imposing presence ensuring everyone gave him a wide berth as he moved toward the door, Amanda and Roberta falling into step beside him. Nolan lingered, clearly wanting to speak with Debbie and Oliver but uncertain of his welcome. After a moment's hesitation, Debbie nodded slightly, giving him permission to approach. Oliver immediately launched into more questions, his excitement temporarily overriding the tension of the meeting. Alternate Mark and Eve moved to speak with Cecil, offering their knowledge of Viltrumite tactics and weaknesses. Good Angstrom Levy busied himself with his dimensional monitors, though his eyes occasionally darted to the original Mark, watching for his reaction. Throughout it all, original Mark remained seated, staring at the now empty space where the holographic display had shown his evil counterparts. His mind churned with Levy's words, questioning everything he thought he knew about heroism, freedom, and the nature of power. "Mark," original Eve said softly, her hand still on his arm. "We should go. Get some rest before whatever happens next." He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on nothing. "Mark," she tried again, more firmly this time. "Come on. Sitting here isn't helping anyone." Slowly, as if waking from a trance, Mark turned to look at her. "What if he's right?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if everything I've been fighting for is just delaying the inevitable? What if I'm not really helping anyone?" Eve's expression softened. "That's not true. You've saved countless lives. You make a difference every day." "Do I?" Mark asked, the doubt in his voice painful to hear. "Or am I just putting band-aids on bullet wounds? Fixing symptoms instead of causes?" "This isn't the time for an existential crisis," Eve said, trying for humor but falling short. "We've got evil versions of you to fight, remember?" Mark didn't smile. "Yeah. Evil versions of me. Versions that made different choices." He looked up at her, his eyes troubled. "What if they're just more honest about what Viltrumites are? What if I'm fighting against my own nature every day, and someday I lose that fight?" "That's not going to happen," Eve insisted, tugging at his arm. "You're not them. You never will be." Mark allowed her to pull him to his feet, his movements mechanical. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you," Eve said simply. "Now come on. We need to be ready when they attack." The night sky above the Global Defense Agency headquarters glittered with stars, their light undimmed by the city's glow far below. The rooftop, normally restricted to maintenance personnel and security details, had become an unexpected sanctuary of calm before the coming storm. Thragg sat alone at the edge of the roof, his massive frame silhouetted against the starlit horizon. The battle beast coat draped around his shoulders rippled slightly in the night breeze as he gazed upward, his expression contemplative. The Emperor's thoughts were his own, his face impassive as he studied the constellations of this earth. The soft sound of footsteps broke his meditation. Without turning, he identified the approaching figure by the pattern of their breathing and the lightness of their tread. "Oliver," he acknowledged as the young half-Viltrumite appeared at the edge of his peripheral vision. "Uncle Thragg." Oliver's voice carried equal measures of excitement and uncertainty. "I didn't know you were up here. I just came to look at the stars. Mom says I should try to get some sleep, but I'm too excited about everything." Thragg remained silent, neither inviting nor dismissing the boy's presence. After a moment's hesitation, Oliver sat down beside him, his legs dangling over the edge of the roof. The contrast between them was striking, the massive Emperor and the small boy, separated by size, power, and the weight of millennia, yet connected by the strange twist of fate that had made them, in some sense, family. "The stars look the same here," Oliver observed, following Thragg's gaze upward. "Are they the same in your universe too?" "The stellar configurations are identical," Thragg confirmed, "though the civilizations that inhabit them differ significantly in some cases." "That's so cool," Oliver breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "Have you been to all of them? The stars, I mean." "Not all," Thragg replied. "The universe is vast, even for one who has lived as long as I have." Oliver nodded thoughtfully, swinging his legs in the open air. "How old are you anyway?" "Dad, I mean, my real dad, never told me much about Viltrumites before he left." Thragg considered the question, weighing the value of precision against the boy's likely comprehension. "I have existed for millennia," he stated simply. "Since before the civil war that decimated our species." "Wow," Oliver whispered. "That's really old. Were you always the Emperor?" No, Thragg corrected. I became Grand Regent after the death of Emperor Argal. Only recently did I assume the imperial title myself. Emperor Argal, Oliver repeated, testing the name. That's my grandfather, right? Since he was Dad's father. Thragg's expression shifted subtly, a minute softening around the eyes that would have been imperceptible to anyone who didn't know him well. Yes. Argal was your grandfather, though neither your father nor you ever knew him. What was he like? Oliver asked, his curiosity evident. Was he as strong as you? The sound of another set of footsteps interrupted before Thragg could answer. Both turned to see Nolan approaching, his expression uncertain as he observed the unlikely pair. I apologize for the intrusion, Nolan said formally. I came to discuss battle strategy, but I see you're occupied. Thragg studied Nolan for a moment, noting the tension in his posture and the careful way he regarded Oliver, this child who was and wasn't his son. Join us, he said finally. The boy was asking about Argal. Nolan's expression shifted to one of surprise and barely concealed interest. Though he had learned of his heritage in their world, he had no personal memories of the father he had never known. May I? He asked, gesturing to the space beside Oliver. Thragg nodded once, and Nolan sat down, completing their unusual trio, Emperor, Prince, and the young boy who connected them across realities. Emperor Argal was the greatest ruler Viltrum ever knew, Thragg began, his deep voice carrying easily in the night air. He was not the physically strongest, that distinction was mine, but his strength of character, his vision for our people, surpassed all others. Oliver leaned forward eagerly, while Nolan listened with rapt attention, hungry for any information about the father he had never known. He found me when I was young, Thragg continued, his gaze returning to the stars. I had already displayed exceptional potential, even by Viltrumite standards. While others saw merely a weapon to be honed, Argal saw something more. He took you in? Oliver asked. Like an adoption? In a manner of speaking, Thragg acknowledged. Viltrumites do not form familial bonds as humans do. Children are raised by the state and trained to serve the Empire. But Argal made an exception in my case. What was that like? Nolan asked softly, unable to contain his curiosity about the father he had never known. Thragg was silent for a long moment, his expression distant as memories surfaced from the depths of millennia past. I remember, he began, his voice taking on a quality neither Nolan nor Oliver had heard before, a day when I was perhaps the equivalent of a human adolescent in development, though only a few years old by your reckoning. I had just completed a combat trial against 5 adult warriors simultaneously, a test no young Viltrumite had ever passed before. Flashback. The training arena's floor was stained with blood, some his, most belonging to his defeated opponents. Thragg stood in the center, breathing heavily but still perfectly poised, his young body already showing the muscle that would one day make him the mightiest of his race. Around him lay the unconscious forms of 5 elite warriors, each at least 3 times his age, each defeated through a combination of raw power and tactical precision beyond his years. The observers, military commanders, genetic specialists, and combat instructors, murmured among themselves, their expressions a mixture of approval and unease at the sheer potential displayed by the young Viltrumite. Impressive, a voice said from the entrance to the arena. Thragg turned, immediately dropping to one knee as Emperor Argal strode into the training area. Tall, powerfully built, with a presence that commanded absolute authority, Argal approached the kneeling youth. Rise, he commanded. Thragg obeyed instantly, standing at attention, his posture perfect despite the injuries he had sustained during the combat trial. You defeated 5 of my elite warriors, Argal observed, circling Thragg slowly. Warriors with centuries of combat experience. Yes, Emperor, Thragg replied, his voice carefully controlled. How? Argal asked simply. Thragg hesitated, uncertain what response was expected. I exploited their weaknesses, Emperor. Their overconfidence. Their assumption that superior experience would overcome superior strength. And did it? Argal pressed. No, Emperor. Experience is valuable, but it must be paired with adaptation. They fought as they had been trained. I fought as was necessary to win. A slight smile touched Argal's lips, an expression rarely seen on a Viltrumite face. Well said. He turned to the observers. Leave us. The commanders and specialists departed immediately, leaving the Emperor and young warrior alone in the bloodstained arena. Walk with me, Argal commanded, heading toward the exit. Thragg fell into step beside him, maintaining a respectful distance as they moved through the corridors of the Imperial training facility. Neither spoke until they reached a private chamber, Argal's personal study within the complex. Do you know why I take an interest in your development, Thragg? Argal asked once the door had sealed behind them. Because I am strong, Emperor, Thragg replied without hesitation. Because I serve the Empire effectively. Many are strong, Argal countered. Many serve effectively. You are unique in a different way. Thragg remained silent, uncertain how to respond. Argal moved to a viewing portal that overlooked the capital city, its gleaming spires reaching toward the sky. What do you see? He asked, gesturing toward the view. Thragg approached, studying the cityscape. I see Viltrum, Emperor. The heart of our empire. Look deeper, Argal instructed. Beyond the buildings. Beyond the infrastructure. What do you see? Thragg considered the question carefully. I see order, he said finally. Precision. Purpose. Yes, Argal nodded approvingly. And that is why I have taken a personal interest in you, Thragg. Because when others look, they see only power and conquest. You see order. Purpose. The fundamental principles upon which true civilization must be built. He turned to face the young Viltrumite directly. Strength without purpose is meaningless. Conquest without vision is empty. The true measure of a ruler is not how many worlds he can subjugate, but how many he can elevate. Elevate, Emperor? Thragg questioned, the concept unfamiliar. To raise up, Argal explained. To improve. To transform chaos into order, weakness into strength, and potential into achievement. That is the true purpose of the Viltrum Empire, not merely to conquer, but to perfect. He placed a hand on Thragg's shoulder, a gesture of physical contact almost unheard of in Viltrumite culture. You will be the strongest of our race, Thragg. That much is already certain. But I intend to ensure you are also the wisest. Thragg stood perfectly still, the weight of the Emperor's hand and words both heavy upon him. I will not disappoint you, Emperor, he promised, his young voice carrying the absolute conviction that would define him for millennia to come. No, Argal agreed, something like pride flickering in his eyes. You will not. As Thragg's voice fell silent, the rooftop was quiet save for the distant sounds of the city below. Oliver stared at him with undisguised awe, while Nolan's expression held a complex mixture of emotions: wonder, regret, pride, and a deep sadness for the father he would never know. That's awesome. Oliver exclaimed finally. I wish I could have met him. My grandfather sounds like he was really cool. Thragg's expression softened imperceptibly as he looked down at the boy. Yes, he agreed, reaching out to ruffle Oliver's hair. I wish you could have known him as well. Nolan watched this interaction with fascination. Thank you for sharing that, he said quietly. The historical records speak of Argal's military achievements and his expansion of the Empire, but not much about the Mun himself. History records actions, not intentions, Thragg replied. Not the private moments that shaped those actions. Was he? Nolan hesitated, then pressed on. Was he a good father? To you, I mean, in the way he raised you. Thragg considered this question carefully. By Viltrumite standards, yes. He was exceptional. By human standards. He paused, searching for the right words. By human standards, he was perhaps severe, demanding, and uncompromising. But he was also fair, consistent, and genuinely invested in my development beyond mere utility to the Empire. Oliver looked between them, his young mind processing this complex dynamic. So you're both kind of like my family now, right? Since one of you is my real dad's alternate self, and the other is my uncle, who is the brother of my dad's alternate dad self. The question was so unexpectedly direct, so childlike in its simplification of their bizarre relationship, that both adult Viltrumites found themselves momentarily at a loss for words. The familial designations are complex, Thragg acknowledged finally. But accurate enough in essence, Nolan added, surprising both himself and Thragg with his agreement. Oliver beamed, clearly pleased with this response. Cool. I went from having no dad to having one and an uncle. The corner of Thragg's mouth twitched in what might almost have been a smile. It is time to return inside, he said, rising to his feet with fluid grace despite his massive size. The battle approaches, and preparations must be finalized. Nolan stood as well, offering a hand to Oliver, who took it without hesitation. The three of them walked back toward the rooftop access door. As they descended, they found Levi in the main operations center, surrounded by his dimensional monitors, his expression tense as he studied the readings. He straightened as they entered, offering a respectful nod to Thragg. Emperor, he acknowledged. I was just about to send for you. Report, Thragg commanded, moving to examine the monitors. My counterpart appears to have stopped bringing in additional Invincibles, Levi explained, adjusting one of the displays to show the warehouse where the evil marks had gathered. The final count is 18. They've been strategizing for the past hour, dividing the city into sectors for systematic destruction. Time until they launch their attack? Thragg asked. Approximately 2 hours, Levi replied. They're waiting for nightfall to maximize chaos and minimize visibility for defenders. Thragg nodded, processing this information with characteristic efficiency. Good. That is sufficient. Sufficient? Nolan questioned. Yes, Thragg confirmed. I will now go personally and execute all of them. The statement, delivered with such casual certainty, sent a ripple of shock through the room. Royal, Mark and Royal, Eve, who had been conferring with Cecil nearby, turned in surprise. Conquest, who had been standing guard by the main entrance, straightened with sudden interest. Emperor, Nolan began cautiously, with all due respect, that would be extremely dangerous. Even for you, 18 Viltrumite-level opponents simultaneously dash 18 children, Thragg corrected dismissively. Untrained, undisciplined, lacking proper tactical coordination. They are no threat. But Emperor, Royal Mark protested, moving to join the conversation. Even if each one is only half as strong as me, that's still a calculation you are making based on your own capabilities, Thragg interrupted. Not mine. Amanda and Roberta exchanged glances, a silent talk passing between them. It was Roberta who spoke, her voice carrying its usual analytical precision but with a subtle bit of emotion that only those who knew her best could detect. Attempting to dissuade the Emperor is statistically futile, she observed. His assessment of the threat level is accurate. For a being of his capabilities, 18 Mark Graysons, regardless of their enhancements or moral alignment, present minimal danger. She's right, Amanda added, moving to stand beside Thragg, the crimson cape flowing around her shoulders. You're thinking of this from your perspective, not his. She looked up at Thragg, a slight smile playing at her lips. Though I'd like to test something out, if you don't mind. I've been getting stronger. Thragg raised an eyebrow, his attention shifting fully to Amanda. Explain. Instead of answering verbally, Amanda closed her eyes in concentration. A subtle change began to ripple across her form, not the dramatic transformation they had all witnessed before, with its explosive growth and gender shift, but something more controlled, more refined. Her height increased gradually until she stood nearly a foot taller than before, her clothing adapted to it, though still more than a head shorter than Thragg. Her skin took on a faint green hue as her hair darkened to pure black, flowing longer down her back, while her eyes, when she opened them, had become a deep, forest green. The crimson cape with its white sash now fit her altered form better, no longer completely dragging on the ground but still flowing regally behind her. She turned in a slow circle, the transformation complete, and looked to Thragg with a questioning expression. How do I look? She asked, her voice the same yet somehow richer, more resonant. Thragg's eyes widened perceptibly, a rare display of genuine surprise from the Emperor. The beauty before him was unexpected, not the raw power of her monster form, but something more elegant, more controlled, more compatible with his own aesthetics. He quickly composed himself, crossing his arms over his chest to maintain his imperial bearing. When did this development occur? He asked, his tone carefully neutral despite the obvious interest in his gaze. Roberta stepped forward, explaining. Amanda sought to increase her effectiveness as your mate and as a combatant, she explained. We collaborated to study the essence of her curse, which appeared to be both genetic and spiritual in nature. With knowledge gained from the demon detective Damien Darkblood's records, she continued, we were able to utilize a combination of mystical invocations and my molecular manipulation abilities to modify the curse's expression. Unlike Eve, I have no mental blocks against manipulating organic matter, though we conducted extensive external testing first to ensure safety. The theory was simple, Roberta elaborated. By aligning the cursed form more closely with Amanda's true soul, female rather than male, we could create a more harmonious transformation that would actually increase power efficiency rather than diminish it. The results are as you see, she concluded, gesturing toward Amanda. Though not as physically imposing as her previous monster form, this version achieves greater strength through superior soul-body alignment. Similar to how Viltrumite women can achieve strength comparable to or exceeding their male counterparts despite less obvious muscular development, due to the efficiency of their smart atom distribution. Amanda stepped closer to Thragg, a playful smile on her now green-tinged lips. Let me test my new strength, she pleaded, her tone affectionate yet determined. I want to see what I can do. Thragg studied her for a long moment, his gaze analytical yet appreciative. Then, with a swiftness that surprised even those familiar with his speed, he reached out and grasped her by the waist, pulling her body against his. Amanda let out a startled yelp, her green-tinted cheeks flushing darker as she found herself pressed against the Emperor's chest. I will test you now, Thragg declared, his voice carrying a hint of something rarely heard from him, genuine pleasure. Before anyone could react, he bent his head and claimed her lips with his own, kissing her with a force he had never before dared use with her human form, fearing it would cause injury. The kiss was passionate and possessive, a clear statement of his approval that left no room for misinterpretation. When he finally released her, Amanda appeared slightly dazed, her enhanced form swaying slightly before regaining its balance. The Eves blushed furiously and looked away, while both Marks found sudden interest in the ceiling or floor, anywhere but what was before them. You are indeed stronger, Thragg acknowledged with satisfaction. Comparable to an average Viltrumite, perhaps more. He turned to Roberta, his expression shifting to one of genuine appreciation. Your contribution to this development is noted and valued. Then, to everyone's shock, Roberta's most of all, Thragg stepped toward her, gently lifted her chin with one finger, and placed a kiss on her lips as well. Unlike the passionate exchange with Amanda, this was briefer, more formal, yet still carrying unmistakable meaning. As he withdrew, Roberta stood perfectly still, her normally calm expression replaced by one of stunned surprise. Amanda, recovering from her own moment of breathlessness, grinned mischievously at her friend's reaction. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Oliver, who had been watching the entire exchange with the unfiltered curiosity of youth. So, Uncle Thragg, he asked loudly, are you going to mate with them now and fight later, or are we going to go fight the evil Marks first? The bluntness of the question, delivered with such innocent directness, created a moment of absolute shock throughout the room. Nolan looked mortified, Conquest's scarred face froze in disbelief, and Cecil appeared to be contemplating the fastest route to the nearest exit. And then, something unprecedented occurred. Thragg laughed. Not a chuckle, not a brief acknowledgement of humor, but a genuine, deep laugh that filled the room and caused everyone present to stare in astonishment. Even Conquest, who had known Thragg for millennia, had never witnessed him laugh. As his laughter subsided, Thragg reached out and ruffled Oliver's hair with genuine affection. No, young one, he said, his voice carrying a warmth few had ever heard from him. We will go and fight. Internally, though, a more calculating pattern of thoughts was blooming, thinking how fast he could conquer this world, to still have the boy as part of the family, not willing to part with one he has grown to care for, no matter how short the time together. Oliver beamed up at him, clearly pleased to have amused his uncle, completely oblivious to how he just made the Emperor completely decisive in his willingness to conquer this world. Thragg turned to address the group, his expression returning to its normal state, though perhaps with a subtle softening around the eyes that hadn't been there before. Prepare for departure, he commanded. We will confront these variance Marks at their gathering point before they can disperse across the city. As the others moved to comply, Levy provided the exact coordinates for the warehouse where the evil Invincibles had gathered. Thragg, Amanda, Royal Mark, Royal Eve, Original Mark, Original Eve, Nolan, Conquest, and Roberta formed up near the exit, ready to depart. Just before they took flight, Thragg paused to deliver a final instruction that sent a chill down most of their spines. If any of you wish to test yourselves against one of these variants, he stated matter-of-factly, you will need to act quickly. Once I have eliminated the first dozen or so, I will proceed to dispatch any that remain. Do not waste time if you desire the experience. The casual confidence with which he spoke of eliminating multiple Viltrumite-level threats, as if discussing nothing more challenging than a mild workout, reminded everyone present of exactly who and what Thragg was. Not merely an emperor, not merely a conqueror, but the single most powerful being in the universe. As they took to the air, Royal Mark exchanged glances with Royal Eve, both thinking the same thing. They were really lucky that Thragg had chosen the peaceful approach rather than the more destructive one. That he had found, somewhere in his ancient soul, the wisdom Argal had seen in him millennia ago. Because soon, all will see why the Emperor is called the terror of the universe. The abandoned warehouse at the edge of Chicago buzzed with tension as 18 versions of Mark Grayson gathered in what had once been a manufacturing floor. Machinery lay dormant around them, covered in dust and cobwebs, silent witnesses to the unprecedented assembly of multiverse variants. Scarred Levy paced before them, his disfigured face twitching occasionally as he outlined his plan on a makeshift digital board. The evil Marks watched with varying degrees of interest and skepticism, their postures and expressions as diverse as their costumes. Once we launch the attack, Scarred Levy explained, gesturing to a map of Chicago, each of you will take your assigned sector. Maximum destruction, maximum terror. I want this Mark to watch as everything he loves burns to ash. Mohawk Mark leaned against a support column, arms crossed over his chest. His distinctive hairstyle, shaved on the sides with a strip of hair down the center, matched the rebellious gleam in his eyes. Yeah, he drawled, examining his fingernails with exaggerated boredom. Destroy everything, make him suffer, blah blah blah. Can we get to the part where you open portals to whatever worlds we want? That's the only reason any of us are listening to your sad revenge fantasy. Sinister Mark shot Mohawk a cold glare. Some of us actually appreciate the artistry of a well-executed vengeance, he said, his voice carrying a menacing edge. When I break something, I make sure it stays broken. Ooh, scary, Mohawk mocked, fake shivering while he did it. Did you practice that line in the mirror this morning? Mustache Mark, sporting facial hair that gave him an air of Viltrumite authority, stepped between them. This bickering is beneath us, he declared, his bearing rigid with military discipline. We are Viltrumites, or at least, those of us who embraced our heritage are. The rest of you are merely playing at power. Save the superiority complex for someone who gives a damn, Mohawk retorted. Not all of us needed Daddy's approval to figure out which end of the universe to piss on. Viltrumite Mark, clad in the traditional white uniform of the Empire's military elite, scoffed. Your vulgarity only confirms your inferiority, he stated coldly. The weak exist to serve the strong. That is the truth of the universe. And I have no interest in debating reality. Oh look, another one who drank the Kool-Aid, Mohawk rolled his eyes. Did they make you recite the Viltrumite pledge before or after they fitted you for that cute little outfit? Omnimark, who had taken his father's title and costume in his reality, stepped forward. His presence commanded attention, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Enough, he declared. My father was a fool. He hesitated. He doubted. None of us made that mistake, which is why we're here instead of dead or imprisoned like so many other versions of ourselves. Mark I, whose appearance most closely resembled the original Mark of this world but with subtle signs of greater experience, shook his head. I used to think there was always a right choice. Now I know, sometimes, there's just the choice you can live with. Spare us the philosophy, snapped Mark II, his costume similar to the original but with darker coloring. Talk all you want. At the end of the day, words won't stop fists. And mine move faster than yours. Yellow Suit Mark, wearing an old-school costume reminiscent of earlier superhero eras, sighed. Back when I started, I thought being a hero was simple. Now I know better. But at least I didn't become this. He gestured at the assembled villainous versions of himself. Self-righteousness doesn't become of you as you are another me, Flaxen Mark replied, his regal bearing betraying his status as Emperor of the Flaxen Dimension in his reality. The Flaxens do not take prisoners. We take victory. And I am their greatest conquest. A conquest that I will soon bestow upon more worlds. Bulletproof Mark, his costume reinforced with tactical armor, merely shrugged. I don't fight for ideals. I fight to win. That's the only thing that matters in the end. Scarf Mark, a long red scarf wrapped around his neck and lower face, remained in the shadows. The shadows teach you things the light never will, he observed quietly. Watch. Listen. Strike only when necessary. Prisoner Mark, still wearing the remnants of Viltrumite prison garb, merely watched with weary eyes. You think you've been through hell, he muttered to no one in particular. No. Hell is when you stop believing you'll ever make it out. Scarred Levy sighed, annoyed at them all talking like they were in an edit or something, and cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the meeting. If you're all quite finished with your posturing, we can dash. He was interrupted as Mohawk Mark suddenly stiffened, his eyes widening in alarm. The cocky demeanor vanished, replaced by something none of the others had seen from him before, pure, unadulterated terror. Damn it, Mohawk whispered, then louder, damn it. In a blur of motion, he crossed the warehouse floor, grabbed Scarred Levy by the collar, and slammed him against the wall. Are you insane? He roared, spittle flying from his lips. You didn't tell us he was here. What are you talking about? Scarred Levy choked out, struggling against Mohawk's grip. The other variants tensed, watching the confrontation with confusion and growing concern. What's gotten into you? Sinister Mark demanded. Mohawk turned to them, his face pale with fear. Are your instincts as dull as your rotten brains? Don't you sense that? That overwhelming bloodlust. The warehouse fell silent as the other variants focused, extending their enhanced senses beyond the immediate surroundings. One by one, their expressions changed, from confusion to concern to dawning horror. What is that? Viltrumite Mark whispered, his usual confidence cracking. Cold sweat beaded on Mohawk's forehead, running down his spine. His hands, still gripping Levy's collar, trembled visibly, a sight so incongruous with his previous bravado that several of the other variants exchanged worried glances. Hey, are you okay? Yellow Suit Mark asked, genuine concern in his voice. They might all hate or at least dislike each other, but this display was too bizarre to ignore. No, I'm not freaking okay, Mohawk hissed, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. I've sensed this spiritual signature before. I literally had to live with that monster shadow of death over the universe for an entire decade full of war till he was dethroned. As the words left his mouth, the ceiling above them began to crumble. Concrete dust rained down as massive cracks spread across the warehouse roof. The variants looked up, instinctively dropping into defensive stances. A booming, gravelly voice echoed through the warehouse, a voice that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened among them. Stand ready for our arrival, worms. The ceiling gave way completely, and through the gaping hole descended several figures. Conquest led the way, his scarred face twisted in a savage grin, his massive frame silhouetted against the night sky. Behind him came others, two versions of Mark and Eve, along with Nolan in his Omniman uniform. But Mohawk's terrified gaze wasn't fixed on any of them. He looked past them to the figure floating slightly higher than the others, whose presence seemed to darken the very air around him. Thragg, Mohawk muttered, the name escaping his lips like a prayer of terror. The other variants readied themselves for battle, powers activating, muscles tensing. But Mohawk's reaction was entirely different. He shook Scarred Levy with renewed fury. Send us back, he roared. Send us all the hell back to our own dimensions. I am not about to eat my own heart for this crazy bastard's revenge plan in a world that apparently Thragg owns Earth. Why the hell didn't you tell us this earlier? Levy struggled in his grip, eyes wide with confusion. Something's wrong, he gasped. Thragg was never supposed to be here. He doesn't rule this Earth. No Viltrumite rules this Earth. I don't care. Mohawk screamed, spittle flying from his lips. Send us back already, or I'll. His words cut off abruptly as a blur of motion passed him. In his panic, Mohawk hadn't been able to focus properly on the approaching threat. Royal Mark had already torn Scarred Levy from his grasp and pinned the Dimensional Traveler against the opposite wall. Nobody is going anywhere, Royal Mark declared, a sadistic smirk spreading across his face as he addressed all the variants, not till you all are in pieces everywhere. The evil variants tensed, ready for battle. Sinister Mark's hands curled into fists, a cold calculation in his eyes as he assessed the newcomers. Viltrumite Mark assumed a combat stance that perfectly mirrored Imperial training protocols. Omni-Mark's eyes began to glow with gathering energy. Conquest, seeing Mohawk's panic and assuming he must be the leader since everyone seemed focused on his next move, launched himself forward with devastating speed. His massive fist aimed directly for Mohawk's face. To everyone's surprise, Mohawk didn't counterattack. Instead, he dodged with a desperate maneuver, flying past Conquest and up through the hole in the ceiling. Rather than fleeing, however, he did something that froze everyone in place. He dropped to one knee in midair before Thragg, head bowed, in a posture of absolute submission. "Please," Mohawk pleaded, his voice stripped of all its former cockiness. "Emperor Thragg, I surrender. Completely." The warehouse fell silent. Every eye turned toward Thragg, waiting for his response. The Emperor regarded the kneeling variant with an expression of mild curiosity. His massive arms crossed over his chest, the battle beast coat rippling slightly in the night breeze. "Curious," Thragg's deep voice rumbled through the silence. "Why does one with such strength not wish to fight? Surely one nearing conquest in might would have more will. One does not gain such strength by being a coward." Despite his terror, Mohawk bristled slightly at the accusation. With all due respect, Emperor," he managed, struggling to keep his language in check. "Knowing when to pick your battles isn't cowardice. I know better than anyone how strong you are." Thragg's interest visibly deepened. "How so? Do you know me in your universe?" Mohawk hesitantly nodded, still not daring to meet Thragg's gaze directly. "I've seen you fight. Comparing us fighting you is like comparing a human child against a Viltrumite officer." He swallowed hard. "No, perhaps the difference is even bigger." Thragg studied him for a moment, his penetrating gaze seeming to see through Mohawk's very soul. "Such fear cannot come merely from witnessing battle. How have you come upon this knowledge?" Cold sweat ran down Mohawk's back as those piercing eyes bore into him from above. He knew lying would be futile. Something about Thragg's gaze made him certain the Emperor would detect any deception instantly. "There was a war," Mohawk admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "In my universe, between the Viltrum Empire and our Thragg. It lasted a decade. Eventually, Thragg died, and I, as Argal's last descendant, was crowned Emperor." "What?" Conquest roared, his scarred face contorting with fury. "How dare you speak such absurdity? How could the Viltrum Empire ever betray their lord, their true Emperor Thragg?" Mohawk ignored Conquest's outburst, his attention fixed solely on Thragg, who regarded him with a calculating expression. "Explain," Thragg commanded simply. "In my universe," Mohawk began hesitantly, "our Thragg was unstable. More so than you, Emperor." How did you defeat him?" Original Mark interrupted, unable to contain his curiosity. Mohawk fell silent, clearly reluctant to continue until Thragg nodded slightly. "I too am curious about this," the Emperor stated. Mohawk took a deep breath. The war lasted nearly an entire decade. It was the entire Viltrum Empire, Earth, and the coalition against Thragg alone. His voice grew quieter. "I, as the descendant of Argal with a pure bloodline, went to the Flaxen dimension, where time moves faster. I impregnated many women there and had hundreds of children that grew up quickly in the accelerated time flow. This gave us a nearly unending army of Viltrumites to throw against Thragg." The horror of what he was describing began to dawn on everyone present. "But even then," Mohawk continued, his voice hollow, "Thragg was too powerful. He could kill any Viltrumite with a single hit. We fought him for a decade until he finally died of exhaustion, but the cost." He closed his eyes briefly. Trillions upon trillions dead. Entire galaxies reduced to ash. A stunned silence followed this revelation. Original Mark and Eve exchanged horrified glances. Royal Mark unconsciously reached for Royal Eve's hand, squeezing it tightly. Nolan's face had gone pale, while Conquest's expression showed a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. Amanda and Roberta shared a knowing look. They had always understood Thragg's power intellectually, but hearing it confirmed from someone who had witnessed its full extent was sobering. "And I can sense," Mohawk added, his voice shaking slightly, "that you're even stronger than our Thragg was. I don't know by how much, but I can feel it. Perhaps at least a dozen times stronger. He shook his head. We can't win against you. And I'd really rather not die. He looked up at Thragg, desperation evident in his eyes. You being here, with two versions of Mark and Eve, must mean you're from another reality as well, having a way to travel between them. Probably with your own angstrom under your control. His voice took on a pleading, bargaining tone. I can be of use to you, Emperor. My empire might not be as strong as yours, but a universe that willingly submits, granting more manpower and resources, is better than having to conquer one and gain control over it. I can do anything you order. I already have control over my own universe. Everyone waited breathlessly for Thragg's response. The Emperor's expression remained impassive as he considered Mohawk's offer. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Finally, Thragg spoke. I can accept your proposal, he stated, causing Mohawk's face to light up with relief. But on one condition. Anything, Emperor, Mohawk replied eagerly. You must kill at least 2 other variants of yourself that are not allied with me, Thragg declared. If you do this, I will accept your proposal. Mohawk's relief transformed into savage joy. He rose with Thragg's permission, cracking his neck to the side, ready to prove his loyalty. The other evil variants gritted their teeth in rage at this betrayal. As for the rest of you, Thragg continued, addressing the assembled evil marks, I will give you a chance as well. Choose the strongest among you, and they may engage in one-on-one combat with my Mark, Nolan, and Conquest. If they can defeat them, I will spare those who, like Mohawk, submit to me. The evil variants exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Despite their differences and antagonism, they recognized the gravity of the situation. After a tense moment, they nodded in agreement, allowing Sinister, Viltrumite, and Omni to step forward as their champions. Take your battles to uninhabited areas, Thragg commanded. If there are civilian casualties, I will kill you all for wasting my resources. The 6 designated fighters paired off, Omni Mark against Nolan, Sinister against Royal Mark, and Conquest against Viltrumite Mark. This is going to be fun, Conquest growled, a savage grin on his face as he sized up his opponent. Let's see if you're worthy of that uniform, boy. I earned this uniform, unlike you, who only butchered weaklings, Viltrumite Mark replied coldly, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. You look like somebody that talks a really big game, but surely you understand that you're about to become a stain on the landscape. Royal Mark taunted Sinister. He really has taken Thragg's advice to heart, instilling terror into the enemy before the battle to make them make mistakes, who merely smiled, a cold, calculating expression. Talk all you want. The difference between us, Sinister replied, is that rather than talk I hit, and when I hit something, I make sure it stays down. Nolan and Omnimark faced each other, a strange mirror image, one who had chosen to protect Earth and one who had chosen to conquer it alongside his father. I'm curious what made you like this. Nolan questioned. You, Omnimark corrected. You and your cowardice. It is why I have chosen to be what you would have become if you hadn't been a coward. With these final exchanges, the 3 pairs shot upward, streaking across the night sky toward different directions, each seeking an appropriate battleground for their confrontation. As they departed, Amanda huffed in disappointment. Come on. This doesn't give me a chance to test my new strength, she complained, flexing her green-tinged fingers. Thragg's gaze softened imperceptibly as he looked at her. You'll have plenty of opportunities in the future, he assured her. For now, this is more interesting. The remaining evil variants watched this exchange with confusion and growing dread, readying themselves for battle against Mohawk. The night had only just begun, and blood would soon paint the sky across Chicago as the Invincible War entered its first true battle. The night sky above the desert outside Chicago blazed with stars, their light undiminished by city glow. In this barren expanse, Nolan Grayson faced his son, or rather, a version of his son who had made very different choices. Omnimark hovered 20 feet away, his eyes burned with a hatred so intense it was almost palpable. I've dreamed of this moment, Omnimark said, his voice carrying easily across the empty space between them. Facing you again. Finishing what I started. Nolan studied him carefully, noting the subtle differences from his own Mark. This variant was more heavily muscled, his posture more rigid with military bearing. His eyes held none of the compassion, none of the humanity that defined the Mark he knew. In your world, Nolan asked, what happened between us? Omnimark's laugh was bitter and hollow. You trained me from the moment my powers manifested, which was much earlier than most Marks. You drilled Viltrumite superiority into me daily. You prepared me to help conquer Earth. His expression darkened. And then, when the time came, you hesitated. You grew weak. So you killed me, Nolan stated, not as a question but as a confirmation. I did what was necessary, Omnimark replied, his voice hardening. What you taught me to do. The weak must be culled so the strong can thrive. Isn't that the Viltrumite way? Before Nolan could respond, Omnimark attacked, crossing the distance between them with blinding speed. His fist connected with Nolan's jaw with a thunderclap of impact that echoed across the desert floor. Nolan reeled backward, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack. He recovered quickly, blocking the follow-up punch and countering with a strike of his own that sent Omnimark spiraling through the air. You fight like him, Omnimark spat, wiping blood from his lip as he stabilized himself. Precise. Controlled. The same techniques my father used before I tore his heart out. Nolan's expression remained calm, though his eyes betrayed a deep sadness. Is that what you want? To kill me too? What I want, Omnimark snarled, charging forward again, is for you to fight back properly. Their fists collided in midair, the impact creating a shockwave that kicked up a dust cloud from the desert floor below. Miles away, over the calm waters of Lake Michigan, Conquest and Viltrumite Mark circled each other like predators. The moon's reflection rippled on the water surface beneath them, occasionally distorted by the shock waves of their clashing powers. You wear the uniform, Conquest growled, his scarred face twisted in a sneer, but do you truly understand what it means to be Viltrumite? Viltrumite Mark's expression remained coldly composed, his white uniform pristine in the moonlight. I was raised in the heart of the Empire, trained by the elite guard. I know more of Viltrumite heritage than you could possibly imagine. Conquest barked a laugh. Words. Empty words from a child playing soldier. They launched at each other simultaneously, their bodies colliding with a force that sent ripples across the lake below. Conquest's massive fist connected with Viltrumite Mark's jaw, while the younger warrior drove his knee into Conquest's abdomen. Neither yielded, their hands locking together as they pushed against each other, testing raw strength against raw strength. Veins bulged on their foreheads as they strained, perfectly matched in this initial test of power. Not bad, Conquest admitted grudgingly. You have some strength in you after all. I was bred for this, Viltrumite Mark replied through gritted teeth. Every cell in my body engineered for combat excellence. Their deadlock continued, neither gaining advantage until, with a sudden burst of force, they both went for the same tactic, a vicious headbutt. Their foreheads collided with a crack that echoed across the water. Conquest reeled backward, momentarily dazed. Viltrumite Mark, though similarly affected, recovered a fraction of a second faster, pressing his advantage with a flurry of punches that drove Conquest down toward the lake surface. Just before impact, Conquest twisted away, leaving Viltrumite Mark to punch through the water with enough force to create a momentary chasm in the lake. As water rushed back to fill the void, Viltrumite Mark rose again, floating above the churning surface. He spread his arms wide, looking at the moonlit landscape before him. Tell me, he called to Conquest, who was recovering his bearings nearby, what is your Thragg like? The Emperor. The abandoned quarry outside Chicago had become a battleground. Royal Mark and Sinister crashed into the stone walls, their impact carving new caves with each collision. Dust and debris filled the air as they exchanged blows that would have shattered mountains. You're holding back, Sinister observed, his scarred face splitting into a grin that held no warmth. Afraid to let the monster out? Afraid you might like it. Royal Mark circled warily, keeping his distance for the moment. This variant of himself was dangerous, not just physically powerful, but unhinged in a way that set off alarm bells in his mind. I'm not like you, Royal Mark stated firmly. Not yet, Sinister countered, his eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. But we all start somewhere. In my world, it began when I realized how easy it was. How simple to just take what I wanted. He launched forward suddenly, his fist connecting with Royal Mark's chest in a blow that cracked ribs. Royal Mark countered with an uppercut that sent Sinister flying into the quarry wall, bringing down tons of rock. Sinister emerged from the rubble, dusting himself off casually. The first time is always the hardest, you know. That moment of crossing the line. His tongue darted out, licking blood from his split lip. For me, it was a villain who pushed too far. I didn't mean to kill him, not really. But then I felt his skull give way under my fist, felt the warm spray of blood. He closed his eyes, as if savoring the memory. It was intoxicating. Royal Mark's expression hardened with disgust. "You're sick." "I'm free," Sinister corrected, his voice dropping to a confiding whisper. "Free from the chains of morality that hold you back. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To take a life and feel nothing but power." He attacked again, this time with a flurry of blows too fast for the human eye to follow. Royal Mark blocked most, but several connected, driving him backward into the quarry floor with enough force to create a crater. Sinister landed beside him, placing a foot on Royal Mark's chest. After that first kill, the rest came easier. Villains. Heroes who got in my way. Eventually. His smile widened. Eventually anyone who looked at me wrong. Royal Mark grabbed Sinister's ankle and twisted violently, throwing him off balance. In the same motion, he surged upward, headbutting Sinister with enough force to crack the variant's nose. Blood sprayed between them as they separated, circling again. "You know what the best part is?" Sinister asked, wiping blood from his face with the back of his hand. "They taste just like chicken." Nolan dodged another of Omnimark's attacks, their battle having moved across miles of desert. The terrain below them was transformed, craters marking their impacts, trenches carved by bodies thrown at supersonic speeds. "Why won't you fight me properly?" Omnimark demanded, frustration evident in his voice. "Stop holding back." "I'm not holding back," Nolan replied calmly. "I'm choosing not to kill you. There's a difference." This seemed to enrage Omnimark further. He charged again, this time managing to grab Nolan in a bear hug, driving them both into the ground with catastrophic force. The impact created a crater 50 feet wide. As dust settled around them, Omnimark pinned Nolan beneath him, his hands wrapped around the older Viltrumite's throat. He was weak, Omnimark hissed, his face inches from Nolan's. "My father. He spent years teaching me that Earth was nothing, that humans were livestock waiting for slaughter. Then when the time came, he couldn't do it." Nolan remained calm despite the crushing pressure on his windpipe. "What happened?" he asked, his voice strained but steady. Omnimark's grip tightened. "I was 12 when my powers manifested. From that day, he trained me relentlessly. No childhood. No friends. Just preparation for our great purpose, the conquest of Earth for the Viltrum Empire." His eyes took on a distant look, lost in memory. "By 16, I was ready. We were to begin with the Guardians of the Globe, just as he'd planned. But when the moment came..." His voice cracked slightly. "He looked at me and said he couldn't do it. That he'd grown to care for this world. That he wanted us to protect it instead." Nolan used the momentary distraction to break Omnimark's grip, throwing him off with a powerful kick. They both rose to their feet, facing each other across the crater. "And that made you angry enough to kill him?" Nolan asked. "He betrayed everything." Omnimark roared. "Everything he taught me. Everything I'd sacrificed for. He made me into a weapon and then told me not to strike." He attacked again, but this time Nolan was ready. He sidestepped the charge, using Omnimark's momentum to flip him over his shoulder and drive him into the ground. "So you killed him," Nolan said, standing over the younger Viltrumite. "And then what? Did conquering Earth bring you the satisfaction you sought?" Omnimark's response was another attack, blind with rage. "Our Emperor," Conquest replied to Viltrumite Mark's question, "is the embodiment of Viltrumite perfection. Strength beyond measure, yet tempered with wisdom that surpasses any ruler in our history." They circled each other above the lake, their earlier clash having established a wary respect. "He conquered Earth himself?" Viltrumite Mark asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "In a single day," Conquest confirmed, pride evident in his tone. "Without spilling a drop of human blood. He demonstrated such overwhelming power that resistance became unthinkable." Then, rather than destroying, he elevated, bringing Viltrumite order and technology to improve human existence. Viltrumite Mark's expression shifted to one of growing interest. My world's Thragg is different. Reactive rather than proactive. He sits upon his throne, issuing commands but rarely acting himself. He sends underlings to conquer worlds while he remains distant, removed. Conquest scoffed. A pale imitation of the true emperor. Perhaps, Viltrumite Mark acknowledged. I've often wondered why. He possesses the same strength, the same potential, and yet. Their conversation was interrupted as Conquest launched a surprise attack, his fist connecting with Viltrumite Mark's jaw with enough force to send him spinning across the lake. Viltrumite Mark recovered quickly, countering with a kick that caught Conquest in the ribs. They exchanged a flurry of blows, each impact creating small sonic booms that rippled the water below. Neither gained a clear advantage, their skills were too evenly matched for quick resolution. After a particularly violent exchange that left both breathing heavily, they separated again, hovering 100 feet apart. You fight well, Conquest acknowledged grudgingly. You can match me blow for blow. Viltrumite Mark nodded in acknowledgement of the compliment. I was trained by the best. But training can only compensate so much for natural ability. He looked thoughtful for a moment. That's the issue with my world's Thragg, I think. He was born the strongest, blessed by the heavens themselves, honored by God with power beyond measure, yet he squanders it. He doesn't understand that with such strength comes the duty to use it, to shape the universe directly rather than through proxies. Conquest's scarred face showed surprise at this philosophical turn. You speak almost like the Emperor himself. Do I? Viltrumite Mark asked, a small smile forming. Perhaps that's why I find myself intrigued by what Mohawk revealed. To learn I am Argal's grandson gives me claim to the throne, yet. He shook his head. What good is a throne if one lacks the power to use it properly? He looked directly at Conquest, his expression resolute. I want to meet your Thragg properly. To serve an emperor who truly embodies what Viltrum should be, not just conquest, but elevation. Evolution of all. Conquest's response was another attack. You're a cannibal, Royal Mark stated flatly, disgust evident in his voice as he wiped blood from a cut above his eye. Sinister shrugged, circling him with predatory grace. Labels are so limiting. I prefer to think of it as recycling. Why let all that protein go to waste? They clashed again, this time with Royal Mark taking the offensive. He drove his fist into Sinister's stomach with enough force to double him over, then followed with a knee to the face that sent teeth flying. Sinister spat blood, his grin now missing several teeth. There it is, he said, satisfaction in his voice. That rage. That violence. You're not so different from me after all. I'm nothing like you, Royal Mark growled, pressing his advantage with a series of punches that drove Sinister back. No. Sinister taunted, blocking some blows while others connected with sickening impact. Then why are you enjoying this so much? The question caught Royal Mark off guard, allowing Sinister to counter with a vicious headbutt that split the skin on both their foreheads. Blood ran down their faces as they grappled, crashing through the quarry wall and into the adjacent hillside. I've killed hundreds, Sinister whispered as they struggled. Men, women, children. Anyone who crossed me. Anyone who looked at me wrong. His voice dropped lower, almost intimate. And do you know what the best part was? The moment when they realized what was happening. When they saw what I really am. Royal Mark broke free, putting distance between them. And what's that? The apex predator, Sinister replied, his eyes gleaming with madness. The top of the food chain. The monster parents warn their children about. He attacked again, this time catching Royal Mark with a blow that sent him crashing through several layers of rock. Royal Mark emerged, spitting blood, his uniform torn and dirty. You know what's funny? Sinister continued, relentless in both his attacks and his psychological warfare. I started with villains. People everyone agreed deserved to die. Then heroes who got in my way. Then civilians who saw too much. He dodged Royal Mark's counterattack, laughing. The first family I ate was an accident. I was hungry after a fight, and they were just there. I was taught they were cattle for so long and well, wrong place, wrong time. Royal Mark roared in fury, tackling Sinister with enough force to drive them both deep into the earth. They emerged seconds later, grappling as they ascended into the night sky. Their daughter tasted the sweetest, Sinister whispered, his mouth close to Royal Mark's ear. So tender. So the rest of his words were cut off as Royal Mark's control finally snapped. Nolan pinned Omnimark to the desert floor, the younger Viltrumite struggling futilely against his superior technique. Despite Omnimark's raw power and rage, Nolan's centuries of experience gave him the edge. Listen to me, Nolan commanded, his voice firm but not unkind. Killing your father didn't bring you peace. Conquering Earth didn't fill the void. Nothing will, as long as you're driven by anger. What do you know about it? Omnimark spat, still struggling. More than you might think, Nolan replied. I once believed as you do, that Viltrumite superiority justified any action, that conquest was our birthright. I was wrong. Omnimark stopped struggling, his eyes narrowing. So you're just like him. Weak. Sentimental. No, Nolan corrected. I'm stronger than I ever was as a conqueror. It takes more strength to protect than to destroy. More courage to love than to dominate. Something flickered in Omnimark's eyes, a momentary crack in his hardened exterior. He said something similar. Right before His voice trailed off. Nolan released him, stepping back. Before you killed him. Omnimark rose slowly, his posture no longer aggressive but somehow diminished. He looked at me with such disappointment. Not fear, not anger. Just sadness. As if I'd failed him somehow. You did, Nolan said quietly. But not in the way you think. You failed to understand what he had learned, that there are things more valuable than power. That connection, love, protection, these aren't weaknesses. They're the only things that give power meaning. Omnimark's face contorted with a complex mixture of emotions, rage, confusion, and beneath it all, a grief so profound it seemed to physically weigh him down. I was a child, he whispered, his voice suddenly sounding much younger. A child doing what I was taught. What I thought was right. I know, Nolan said gently. And now? Omnimark asked, looking lost. What am I now? Instead of answering, Nolan did something unexpected. He stepped forward and embraced Omnimark, holding him as a father would hold a son. For a moment, Omnimark remained rigid in the embrace. Then, with a sound that was half roar, half sob, he collapsed against Nolan, years of buried grief finally breaking through. I killed him, he wept, his entire body shaking. I killed my father. I killed him. Nolan held him tighter, his own eyes damp. I know, son. I know. The battle between Conquest and Viltrumite Mark had escalated to new heights of violence. The lake below them had been transformed, massive waves radiating outward from each impact, water displaced by the sheer force of their confrontation. Despite the ferocity of their exchange, there was a strange respect developing between them. Each recognized in the other a worthy opponent, a true Viltrumite warrior. You fight like one born to battle, Conquest acknowledged after a particularly brutal exchange left both of them bleeding from multiple wounds. And you fight like the legends describe, Viltrumite Mark returned. The stories of Conquest's ferocity are told even in my dimension. They clashed again, this time with Conquest gaining the upper hand. His centuries of experience allowed him to anticipate Viltrumite Mark's attacks, countering with precision strikes that gradually wore down the younger warrior's defenses. A particularly devastating punch sent Viltrumite Mark plummeting into the lake, the impact creating a massive splash visible for miles. Conquest followed, diving into the water to continue the battle beneath the surface. Underwater, their movements were slightly slowed but no less lethal. They exchanged blows that created pressure waves, fish floating dead in their wake as the concussive force ruptured their swim bladders. Viltrumite Mark, running out of breath, attempted to surface, but Conquest grabbed his ankle, dragging him deeper. The ancient warrior's grin was visible even in the murky depths. He had no intention of allowing his opponent to breathe. But Viltrumite Mark had been trained for such situations. Instead of struggling upward, he reversed direction, driving his fist into Conquest's abdomen with enough force to expel the air from the older Viltrumite's lungs. As bubbles escaped Conquest's mouth, Viltrumite Mark seized his momentary advantage, grabbing Conquest by the throat and shooting upward, breaking the surface of the lake with a massive plume of water. They hovered above the churning surface, both gasping for air, their uniforms soaked and torn. "Yield," Conquest demanded between breaths. "Never," Viltrumite Mark replied, though his exhaustion was evident. They charged at each other again, their collision creating a thunderclap that echoed across the lake. This time, Viltrumite Mark managed to catch Conquest in a hold that immobilized the ancient warrior's arms, leaving him vulnerable. "I could kill you now," Viltrumite Mark said, his voice strained with effort as he maintained the hold. "Then do it," Conquest growled. "Finish it, if you can." Viltrumite Mark's grip tightened momentarily, then, to Conquest's surprise, released entirely. He drifted backward, still in a defensive posture but no longer attacking. "I don't want to kill you," Viltrumite Mark stated. "I want to serve alongside you. To learn from your emperor. To be part of something greater than conquest for conquest's sake." Conquest studied him warily, searching for deception and finding none. "Why should I believe you?" "Because we both know I could have ended you just now," Viltrumite Mark replied simply. "And we both know you could have done the same to me several times during our battle. We've been testing each other, not truly trying to kill." A slow, reluctant smile spread across Conquest's scarred face. "Perceptive. Most wouldn't have realized." "I was trained to see beyond the obvious," Viltrumite Mark said. "To understand the deeper currents of battle." Conquest nodded, a decision made. "The Emperor will determine your fate. If he finds you worthy, perhaps you will indeed serve alongside me." "That is all I ask," Viltrumite Mark replied, inclining his head in a gesture of respect. Royal Mark's rage had transformed him. Gone was the calculated fighter, replaced by something primal and terrifying. He attacked Sinister with a ferocity that seemed to surprise even the cannibalistic variant. Their battle had devolved into something barely recognizable as combat between sentient beings, more like animals tearing at each other with mindless fury. They bit, clawed, and headbutt, each blow carrying enough force to level buildings. "Yes." Sinister laughed through bloodied lips. "This is what I wanted. Show me what you really are." Royal Mark didn't respond with words. His fist connected with Sinister's jaw, dislocating it with a sickening crack. Before Sinister could recover, Royal Mark followed with a knee to the stomach that doubled him over, then an elbow to the back of the head that sent him crashing to the quarry floor. Sinister struggled to rise, spitting teeth and blood. "You can't kill me," he taunted. "You don't have it in you." "Not really." Royal Mark landed beside him, his expression cold with fury. "You're wrong." He grabbed Sinister by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Sinister kicked and struggled, his dislocated jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. "I can kill," Royal Mark said, his voice eerily calm despite the rage in his eyes. "When necessary. To protect others. To prevent greater harm." "You can't." "Not like this," Sinister managed to gargle through his damaged jaw. "Not in cold blood." "This isn't cold blood," Royal Mark replied. "This is justice. For everyone you've murdered. Everyone you've consumed." Sinister's eyes widened as he realized Royal Mark was serious. He renewed his struggles, managing to break free with a desperate burst of strength. He stumbled backward, trying to put distance between them. "Wait," he pleaded, his bravado suddenly gone. "We can talk about this. I can change. I can dash." Royal Mark was on him in an instant, tackling him with enough force to drive them both through the quarry floor and into the underground caverns beneath. In the darkness, their struggle continued, punctuated by the sound of breaking rock and pained grunts. When they emerged again, Sinister was clearly losing. His movements were sluggish, his attacks easily countered. Blood poured from multiple wounds, his uniform in tatters. "Please," he begged as Royal Mark advanced on him. "Mercy." "Did you show mercy to the family you devoured?" Royal Mark asked, his voice deadly quiet. "To the daughter you said tasted sweet?" Sinister's eyes darted around, looking for escape. Finding none, he attempted one final attack, lunging at Royal Mark with the last of his strength. Royal Mark sidestepped the clumsy assault, then, in a move of shocking brutality, seized Sinister's head between his hands. With a roar that echoed across the quarry, he twisted violently. The sound of Sinister's neck breaking was like a gunshot in the night. But Royal Mark wasn't finished. With a savagery that would have horrified his friends and family, he continued twisting until Sinister's head separated completely from his body. Blood sprayed across Royal Mark's face and chest as he stood there, holding the severed head of his evil counterpart, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Slowly, awareness returned to his eyes. He looked at what he held, at what he had done, and for a moment seemed about to be sick. Then his expression hardened again. "Justice," he whispered to himself. "Nothing more." Back at the warehouse, the remaining evil variants watched nervously as Mohawk Mark descended from the sky, landing on the concrete floor with a heavy thud. Behind him, he dragged two bodies, Phantom Mark and Maskless Mark, both clearly dead. He dropped them unceremoniously at Thragg's feet, then knelt again, head bowed. "As you commanded, Emperor." "Two of them, dead by my hand." The other variants tensed, ready for battle or flight, but Thragg had made no move against them. He sat on what appeared to be an improvised throne, a stack of shipping containers arranged to support his massive frame, watching the proceedings with clinical detachment. Amanda stood to his right in her enhanced form, her green-tinged skin gleaming in the dim light of the warehouse. Roberta positioned herself to his left, her analytical gaze sweeping over the assembled variants, calculating threats and possibilities. Original Mark and Eve remained close to each other, their expressions troubled as they observed the evil versions of Mark. These were the paths not taken, the choices that could have led to darkness instead of heroism. Suddenly, Thragg's eyes, which had been closed in apparent meditation, snapped open. "They are done," he stated simply. As if on cue, three figures appeared in the hole in the warehouse ceiling. Nolan descended first, supporting a subdued Omnimark who appeared physically unharmed but emotionally devastated. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression haunted. Next came Conquest and Viltrumite Mark, both bearing the wounds of their battle but moving with mutual respect rather than hostility. They landed on opposite sides of the warehouse, but without the tension that had marked their earlier confrontation. Finally, Royal Mark returned alone, his uniform soaked with blood, his expression grim. He carried something wrapped in the remains of his cape, a bundle that left little doubt as to Sinister's fate. Thragg surveyed the returning combatants, noting the outcomes with a slight nod of satisfaction. "As expected," he murmured, rising from his makeshift throne. The evil variants looked between themselves, uncertainty clear in their expressions. With Mohawk's betrayal, Sinister's death, and the apparent defection of both Omnimark and Viltrumite Mark, their chances of success had diminished dramatically. Thragg's gaze swept over them, his expression unreadable as he contemplated their fate. The hospital room was quiet save for the soft beeping of medical equipment. Sunlight streamed through half-drawn blinds, casting alternating bars of light and shadow across the sterile white bed where Eve lay motionless. Dark Mark sat beside her, his fingers idly toying with a strand of her hair. His expression was calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to the horrors he had inflicted upon the world, upon her. "Your hair's growing back so quickly," he observed, his voice carrying a gentleness that made his words all the more disturbing. "The nurses tell me it's a sign of your health improving. Isn't that wonderful, Eve?" She remained silent, her eyes the only part of her that could still move freely. They fixed on the ceiling, deliberately avoiding his gaze. The paralysis that had claimed her body from the neck down had not taken her mind, her thoughts, or her hatred, only her ability to express them. "The resistance in the eastern quadrant fell yesterday," Dark Mark continued conversationally, as though discussing the weather. "They thought they could hide in the old subway tunnels. As if anything on this planet could hide from me." A smile touched his lips as he tucked the strand of hair behind her ear. 43 casualties. Much cleaner than the operation last week. Eve's eyes flickered briefly, the only indication of the grief that surged through her. 43 more friends, allies, and possibly people she had recruited herself, gone. How many had died because of her failure to stop him? The number was too high to think about without crying. "Dad says we'll have complete control of the continent by the end of the month. The European resistance is proving stubborn." He frowned slightly. "But they'll break eventually. They all do." His hand moved to her cheek, caressing it with a tenderness that made her stomach turn. "I've been thinking about our future, Eve. Once all this unpleasantness is behind us. Maybe a house somewhere quiet. Away from the cities. Just the two of us. He stated as his hand began to run down lower. The monitor tracking Eve's heart rate betrayed her, the steady beeping accelerating slightly. Dark Mark noticed, his smile widening. You see? Even your body knows we belong together, he whispered, leaning closer. You're the only one who keeps me balanced. The only one who matters. A tear escaped the corner of Eve's eye, trailing down her temple into her hair. She hated this weakness, this betrayal by her own body, showing her fear, but she couldn't stop it. Couldn't wipe it away. Couldn't scream the rage that built inside her with every gentle touch of his hand. Don't cry, Dark Mark soothed, wiping away the tear with his thumb. I know it's overwhelming. All this love I have for you. But you'll understand eventually. You'll see that everything I've done, everything we've built, it's all been for us. The sunlight streaming through the window suddenly dimmed, as if a cloud had passed over the sun. But the shadow that fell across them was too abrupt, too defined. Dark Mark frowned, turning toward the window. A massive figure stood there, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Broad-shouldered and imposing, with a distinctive mustache visible even in shadow. Dark Mark reacted instantly, years of combat instinct propelling him to his feet. Who? His question died as he launched himself at the intruder, fist extended. The punch connected solidly with the figure's face, and stopped as if he'd struck the Invincible. A sickening crack echoed through the room as Dark Mark's arm shattered on impact, bone fragments tearing through muscle and skin. He screamed, stumbling backward, clutching the mangled limb. What the hell? He gasped, his face contorted with pain and shock. Who are you? The figure stepped fully into the room, and Eve's eyes widened in recognition and fear of the Mun she'd seen in various propaganda posters. Thragg, but unknown to her, not the Thragg of their world. Such disappointment, Thragg said, his deep voice resonating through the small room. So unlike the boy I have come to see as my own nephew. Dark Mark scrambled backward, confusion mingling with pain on his face. What are you talking about? Grand Regent I am not your Grand Regent, Thragg interrupted, advancing slowly. And you are nothing like the Mark Grayson I know. Before Dark Mark could respond, Thragg moved with impossible speed. One massive hand closed around Dark Mark's throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. The other seized his torso. Eve closed her eyes, but she couldn't block out the wet, tearing sound that followed, nor Dark Mark's abruptly silent scream. When she opened them again, Thragg stood holding two separate halves of the Mun who had tormented her for months, blood dripping from his hands onto the pristine hospital floor. With casual disdain, he tossed the remains aside, turning his attention to the doorway where a new figure had appeared. Mark. Nolan's voice came, confused and alarmed. Then his eyes fell on Thragg, widening in shock as he took in the scene, the blood, the scattered remains, and Thragg standing in the center of it all. Grand Regent? What is the meaning of this? My son was a disgrace, Thragg finished for him, his voice cold. As are you. Nolan, sensing the danger, took a defensive stance, but fear was evident in his eyes. We've been loyal to Viltrum. We've conquered this planet as ordered. Whatever you think we've done, Thragg didn't allow him to finish. With a burst of speed that made him appear to teleport, he stood before Nolan, one massive hand engulfing the Viltrumite's face. Nolan struggled, his hands clawing at Thragg's arm, but it was like trying to bend a planet. Eve turned away as Thragg applied pressure, unable to watch even though a part of her, a dark, wounded part she barely recognized, felt a surge of vindication as her tormentors met justice at last. The wet sound that followed told her everything she needed to know. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the steady beeping of the medical equipment and the soft drip of blood from Thragg's hands. Eve cautiously turned her gaze back to find him looking at her, his expression unreadable. With careful movements that seemed incongruous with his size and the violence he'd just unleashed, Thragg approached her bed. He took the chair Dark Mark had occupied, lowering himself onto it with deliberate gentleness. The silence stretched between them, blood continuing to drip from his massive form onto the white hospital floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was surprisingly soft. I am from another reality, he stated simply. Do you know of such things? The multiverse. Eve, after a moment of taking it in slowly, managed a small nod, the movement barely perceptible but the most she could manage with her condition. In my world, I am Emperor of the Viltrum Empire, Thragg continued. I have conquered Earth, But unlike these. He gestured dismissively at the remains. Fools, I did so efficiently. Without bloodshed. Without needless suffering. Eve watched him warily, unable to reconcile this articulate, almost gentle giant with a being who had just torn two Viltrumites apart with his bare hands. In my world, your counterpart has become important to me, Thragg said, a hint of something almost like discomfort crossing his features. I have come to see her as a daughter, though I do not know if she views me in a paternal light. Eve's eyes widened slightly at these unexpected words. You are not her, Thragg acknowledged. And I am not your world's Thragg. But when I learned of your situation from my world's Angstrom Levy, I felt compelled to act. He paused, seeming almost surprised by his own admission. This is unlike me. I do not typically act on impulse. Perhaps my time on Earth has changed me more than I realized. He was beginning to act more like his first life self, more like Sam'el, he internally realized. Perhaps it was because he finally began to feel the connection Sam'el felt rather than the coldness of being the lonesome emperor. He fell silent again, studying her with those eyes that seemed to see through to her very core. Soon, Angstrom will arrive with doctors from my world, he finally continued. They possess Viltrumite medical technology capable of repairing your spine. You will move again, by your own will. He rose from the chair, towering over her bed. I will leave you to rest until they arrive. As he turned to go, Eve felt a surge of desperate energy. Focusing every ounce of her will, she managed to activate her powers, the molecular manipulation abilities that had once made her a formidable hero. Pink energy flickered weakly around her right hand, forcing it to move against the paralysis that had claimed it, something she had not attempted to do in months, for each time she did, Darkmark took her more forcefully to enforce his claim over her. With trembling effort, she reached out and grasped Thragg's massive hand. Please, she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Don't go. Thragg froze, looking down at her hand on his with an expression of genuine surprise. After a moment's hesitation, he lowered himself back into the chair. Silence fell between them again, but Eve maintained her grip on his hand, drawing strength from the contact. With another surge of pink energy, she attempted to push herself into a sitting position. Thragg, seeing her struggle, gently placed his other hand behind her back, supporting her weight as he helped her upright. What happened next surprised them both. Eve, overcome with emotion, relief, grief, and hope all crashing through her at once, threw herself forward against Thragg's chest. Her thin arms couldn't encircle his massive frame, but she clung to him nonetheless, her face pressed against the blood-stained battle beast coat. Thank you, she sobbed, the words spilling out in a broken litany. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thragg remained motionless for several seconds, clearly uncertain how to respond to this display. Then, with a gentleness, he carefully returned the embrace, one massive hand supporting her back, the other lightly patting her shoulder. You are safe now, he said simply. Eve continued to cry, years of helplessness and horror pouring out in a flood of tears. She cried for the friend she had lost, for the world that had fallen, for the body that had betrayed her, and for the future that had been stolen. But beneath the grief was something she had thought lost forever: hope. Thragg held her as she wept, his expression softening into something that might almost have been compassion. This was not his Eve, not the young woman he had come to see as a daughter in his own world. But in this moment of vulnerability, the distinction didn't seem to matter. Thragg stood at the foot of the hospital bed, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the sterile white floor. The battle beast coat draped regally around his shoulders, its white fur contrasting sharply with the clinical environment of the medical bay. Terius, a Viltrumite officer more renowned for his scientific and medical expertise than his combat prowess, though still formidable by any non-Viltrumite standard, stood beside him, reviewing holographic data that floated above a small device in his palm. The procedure was successful, Emperor, Terius reported, his voice carrying the precise diction of someone accustomed to delivering medical assessments. The patient's spinal cord has been fully regenerated using our cellular reconstruction technology. Neural pathways have been re-established at approximately 87% efficiency, which exceeds our initial projections. He adjusted the holographic display, zooming in on a detailed image of vertebrae and nerve clusters. With continued therapy, she should regain full mobility within 2 to 3 weeks. The paralysis has been completely reversed. Thragg nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. And her overall condition? Stable and improving, Terius replied. The muscle atrophy was extensive due to prolonged immobilization, but our accelerated regeneration protocols are addressing that issue. Her cardiovascular system shows signs of stress consistent with prolonged trauma, but that too is responding well to treatment. War-torn Eve lay propped up against several pillows, her thin frame almost lost in the hospital gown that hung loosely from her shoulders. Her eyes, alert and wary despite the exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath them, moved between the two Viltrumites as they discussed her condition as if she weren't present.
"See can I?"
She began, her voice catching in her throat. The sound was still raspy, still unfamiliar even to her own ears after months of disuse. She swallowed painfully and tried again.
"Can I walk soon?"
Thragg turned his attention to her, his gaze softening imperceptibly.
"Yes."
"The damage has been repaired." War-torn Eve nodded, relief washing over her features. Then, hesitantly, she raised a hand to touch her face, fingers tracing the network of scars that marred her once smooth skin. Her other hand moved to her hair, short, unevenly cut, growing back in patches where it had been cruelly shorn. "The scars," she managed, her words halting and broken.
"Can remove? And hair make grow?"
Terius looked confused by the request, glancing at Thragg for guidance. The Emperor turned his penetrating gaze on the medical officer, the question clear in his eyes though he spoke no words. "Well, yes," Terius replied after a moment, addressing Eve directly. "Our dermal regeneration techniques could certainly address the scarring, and follicular stimulation would accelerate hair growth to any desired length. However," he hesitated, his professional concern evident, "you've just undergone a major neural reconstruction procedure. Your body is still adapting to the cellular changes. It would be medically advisable to wait at least a few days before attempting further interventions." "No," Eve said, her voice stronger now, almost desperate.
"Now.
"Please, want it now." Thragg studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then, in a movement that surprised both Eve and Terius, he lowered himself to one knee beside her bed. Even in this position, his massive frame allowed him to look down at her, but the gesture brought him closer to her eye level than he had been before. With careful deliberation, he extended his hand toward hers, hovering just above her fingers, a silent request for permission. Eve hesitated only briefly before grasping his massive hand with surprising strength, her thin fingers wrapping around his.
"Why?"
Thragg asked, his deep voice gentler than Terius had ever heard it. "Why is this so urgent to you?" Eve's eyes flickered away, then back to his face. The internal struggle was visible in her expression, the desire to keep her pain private warring with the need to explain.
"Mark."
She began, the name itself seeming to cause her physical discomfort. "My worlds."
"Mark. He didn't like long hair."
Said only, reason for it, sign of health. She paused, gathering her strength, her grip on Thragg's hand tightening.
He cut it. When grew. Too much. And.
Her free hand moved unconsciously to trace one of the more prominent scars that ran from her collarbone up the side of her neck.
"He marked me."
Said I, too beautiful. Her voice dropped to a whisper, the words coming with visible effort.
"Feared when Viltrum came, stronger Viltrumites, want me."
Said, keep me, not beautiful, until he's stronger than them all. Thragg's jaw tightened, muscles flexing beneath his skin as rage flooded through him. The hand not holding Eve's clenched into a fist at his side, knuckles whitening with a strain of contained fury. Terius took an involuntary step backward, recognizing the signs of the Emperor's rarely seen but legendary anger. The medical officer had witnessed Thragg's wrath only once in his centuries of service, and the memory of what had happened to those who had provoked it was enough to make him instinctively seek distance. But Thragg, noticing Eve's eyes widen at his reaction, visibly forced the rage from his expression. With obvious effort, he relaxed his clenched fist, his features settling back into their usual impassive mask, though a dangerous light still burned in his eyes. "Rest now," he told her, his voice controlled once more. "I will ensure you receive the best care available. The procedures you request will be performed as soon as safely possible." His hand squeezed hers gently. "You will be more beautiful than ever, if that is your wish." Relief washed over Eve's face, and she nodded, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Thragg rose to his full height, turning to face Angstrom Levy, who had been standing silently at the back of the room throughout the exchange, respectfully keeping his distance. "Angstrom," Thragg commanded, "open a portal to the second world. There are matters there that still require my attention." Levy nodded, stepping forward and raising his hands. Green energy began to swirl between his palms, gradually expanding into a swirling vortex. "No!" Eve cried out suddenly, her voice cracking with panic. She struggled to sit up straighter, wincing at the movement. "I come with you." Thragg frowned, turning back to her. "That is not possible. You are in no condition for interdimensional travel. Furthermore, the world I am returning to contains more than a dozen variants of Mark Grayson. I will not subject you to such an experience after what you have endured." Eve's face paled at the mention of multiple marks, but determination quickly replaced her fear. "I have you," she insisted, her broken speech gaining strength from her conviction. "Feel safe. With you. Not safe, here, when you gone." Her eyes filled with tears as she added, "Please, Dad, don't leave me here." Thragg froze, genuine surprise crossing his features at the familial term. His penetrating gaze studied her intently, seeing beyond her words to the motivation behind them. He recognized the maneuver for what it was, not malicious manipulation, but a desperate attempt to forge a connection that would ensure his protection, using knowledge of his relationship with her counterpart to sway his decision. For a moment, he seemed about to refuse. Then, with a resigned sigh that would have shocked anyone who knew him well, he approached the bed and carefully lifted Eve into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing. "You do not need to call me that to secure my protection," he told her quietly, his deep voice rumbling through his chest against her ear. "My commitment to your safety is not conditional upon reciprocation of familial sentiment." Eve stiffened in his arms, caught in her transparent attempt at manipulation. A flush of shame colored her cheeks as she slowly nodded. "Sorry," she whispered. "It is understandable," Thragg replied, the slight hesitation in his voice betraying how unfamiliar such words of comfort were to him. "Fear drives many actions." With Eve securely in his arms, Thragg approached the swirling green portal that Levy had fully formed. The dimensional traveler stepped aside respectfully, avoiding direct eye contact with the Emperor, a habit he had developed out of both fear and reverence. "Maintain surveillance of this facility," Thragg instructed Terius. "I expect a full report on her treatment options upon my return." "Yes, Emperor," Terius acknowledged with a formal bow. Thragg stepped through the portal, the swirling energy enveloping them both. The transition between dimensions was momentary, a brief sensation of weightlessness followed by a shift in atmospheric pressure and temperature. As they emerged on the other side, Thragg immediately sensed something amiss in the air, a familiar energy signature that shouldn't have been present. Without hesitation, he launched into flight, still cradling Eve protectively against his chest. Noticing her shiver slightly at the sudden rush of cold air, Thragg instinctively accelerated the movement of his atoms, generating heat that radiated from his body at a carefully controlled temperature, warm enough to keep her comfortable without risking harm. Eve rested her head against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat strangely comforting despite the disorientation of interdimensional travel. The battle beast coat provided additional insulation, its fur soft against her cheek. They flew across a landscape that gradually transformed from urban sprawl to open countryside, then to desert. In the distance, Thragg's enhanced hearing detected the unmistakable sound of combat, the thunderous impacts of Viltrumite-level beings exchanging blows. More concerning was the sound that accompanied the impacts, Conquest's distinctive laugh, a sound Thragg knew intimately after millennia of commanding the ancient warrior. But there was something off about it, an echo, as if two identical sounds were overlapping. He already had his suspicions as he remembered the knowledge from his first life, but to be certain, he won't make any assumptions yet. As they approached the source of the disturbance, Thragg's suspicions were confirmed. Below them, on a flat expanse of desert surrounded by rocky outcroppings, two figures battled in the air, both unmistakably Conquest, identical in their scarred visages and massive frames, differing only in subtle details of their uniforms. More surprising still was the audience. Gathered on a nearby hill were the remaining evil variants of Mark Grayson, along with Royal Mark, Royal Eve, Original Mark, Original Eve, and Nolan. They sat or stood in small groups, watching the aerial combat with varying degrees of interest and excitement. What is the meaning of this? Thragg called out, his voice carrying across the desert with commanding authority. The effect was immediate. The battle halted mid-punch, both conquests freezing in place as all eyes turned upward. Royal Conquest, recognizing his emperor, immediately backed away from his opponent and dropped to one knee in the air, a gesture of respect that looked oddly formal given their suspended position. Emperor, Royal Conquest acknowledged, head bowed. The second conquest, clearly this world's original version, remained hovering in place, his scarred face registering shock as he beheld Thragg for the first time. His eyes widened, taking in the battle beast coat, the imposing stature, and the unmistakable aura of absolute authority that surrounded the emperor. Grand Regent. Original Conquest breathed, disbelief evident in his voice. Below them, the assembled Marks and Eves had risen to their feet, all attention now focused on the emperor and the woman he carried in his arms. Royal Mark and Royal Eve exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that something significant had occurred during Thragg's absence. The silence stretched, tension building as Original Conquest continued to stare, his expression shifting from shock to something more complex, a mixture of recognition, fear, and a warrior's assessment of a potential opponent. Thragg's eyes narrowed slightly as he regarded this alternate version of his loyal general. The similarities were striking, yet he could already detect subtle differences in posture and in the way this conquest carried himself, less disciplined, more wild. War-torn Eve trembled in Thragg's arms, her eyes fixed on the scene below, particularly on Original Mark, whose appearance was painfully similar to the one who had tormented her for so long. She pressed herself closer to Thragg's chest, seeking the security his presence provided. Thragg tightened his protective hold slightly, a silent reassurance that she was safe. His gaze, however, remained fixed on the two conquests before him, his expression unreadable as he contemplated this unexpected development. The desert fell completely silent, the only sound the gentle whisper of wind across the sand as everyone waited for the Emperor's next words. "Explain," Thragg commanded, his voice cutting through the desert air like a blade. War-torn Eve clung tighter to his chest, her fingers instinctively curling into the soft fur of the battle beast coat as she felt the rumble of his voice through his torso. The sight of so many marks, even at a distance, made her heart race, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Thragg sensed her distress and, without taking his eyes off the assembled group below, gently ran his hand through her short, uneven hair in a gesture of comfort. The movement was subtle but deliberate, his massive fingers surprisingly gentle against her scalp. Three figures had immediately knelt at Thragg's presence, Viltrumite Mark, Mohawk Mark, and Royal Conquest, their heads bowed in respect. The others remained standing, watching with varying degrees of wariness and curiosity. Viltrumite Mark, still on one knee, was the first to speak. "Emperor, during your absence, this world's conquest arrived with intentions to begin conquest operations." His voice carried clearly across the desert, formal and precise. "Since you had claimed this world as your own, Royal Conquest took it upon himself to intercept and engage the intruder." Royal Conquest. Thragg interrupted, raising an eyebrow in question. His hand continued its gentle motion through War-torn Eve's hair, and she gradually relaxed against him, her breathing slowing as she focused on the rhythmic sensation rather than the frightening scene below. Viltrumite Mark continued without embarrassment, his expression remaining respectfully neutral. "We needed to distinguish between them, Emperor. Since he serves you, and you rule as Emperor in your world, the designation seemed fitting." Thragg nodded once, a slight inclination of his head. "Continue," he commanded, gesturing with his free hand. Royal Conquest chose to engage his counterpart single-handedly in this uninhabited location to minimize collateral damage, Viltrumite Mark explained. He believed you would prefer the world preserved intact rather than risking destruction through combat in populated areas. War-torn Eve's eyes darted nervously between the two conquests, her body tensing at the sight of their battle-ready stances. Thragg, noticing her reaction, adjusted his hold slightly, angling his body to partially shield her from their view. "He has been fighting to protect your interests, Emperor," Viltrumite Mark concluded. Thragg's gaze shifted to Royal Conquest, who remained kneeling in midair, head bowed. "Well done," he acknowledged, his tone carrying a rare note of approval. "However, your protection is no longer necessary. I am here now." Royal Conquest's scarred face revealed nothing, but the slight straightening of his posture betrayed his pride at the Emperor's praise. Thragg descended slowly, War-torn Eve still cradled against his chest, until he was at eye level with Original Conquest, who remained hovering in place. The two massive beings faced each other, separated by mere yards of empty air. War-torn Eve pressed herself more firmly against Thragg's chest, her heartbeat accelerating as they drew closer to the unfamiliar conquest. Thragg responded by generating slightly more heat from his body, the warmth enveloping her like a protective blanket. "You," Thragg addressed Original Conquest, his voice carrying the weight of Imperial command, "will return to this world's Viltrum immediately. Inform your Thragg of my presence. Tell him I wish to meet with him here on Earth. There is much we must discuss, as I find his methods lacking." Original Conquest's scarred face contorted with indignation. His eyes narrowed as they moved from Thragg's impassive expression to the girl he held so carefully in his arms. The gentleness of the gesture seemed to trigger something in the warrior, a contempt that overrode his initial shock. "I take no orders from you," Original Conquest growled, his voice thick with disdain. "Emperor or not in your world, you are nothing here." His gaze lingered on War-torn Eve, his lip curling slightly. "I will not carry messages for a soft-hearted fool who coddles humans, another Thragg or not." War-torn Eve flinched at the hostility in his voice, her fingers digging deeper into the battle beast fur. A small whimper escaped her lips, audible only to Thragg. The change in Thragg was instantaneous. His expression remained impassive, but something shifted in his eyes, a cold, deadly focus that made the air around them seem to drop several degrees in temperature. Original Conquest, misinterpreting Thragg's stillness as hesitation, launched himself forward, his massive fist aimed directly at the Emperor's face. The punch never landed. With a speed that made Original Conquest's attack seem glacial by comparison, Thragg's free hand shot out and caught the warrior's fist mid-strike. For a fraction of a second, they remained frozen in that position, Conquest straining forward. Then, with a casual squeeze, Thragg crushed Original Conquest's metallic arm, the reinforced alien alloy crumpling like tissue paper under his grip. Shards of metal and circuitry exploded outward as the limb collapsed into useless fragments. Original Conquest's roar of shock and pain was cut short as Thragg released his mangled arm and seized his jaw in a lightning-fast movement. The Emperor's massive hand engulfed the lower half of Conquest's face, fingers digging into his flesh. "A dog," Thragg stated, his voice terrifyingly calm, "should show its master more respect." His grip tightened incrementally. Especially a mad dog, whose life hangs by the thin thread of its master's patience. With a sharp twist, Thragg dislocated Original Conquest's jaw, the sound of cracking bone audible across the desert. He released his grip, allowing the warrior to stumble backward in the air, hands clutching his ruined face as he bled and struggled to hold his jaw together. The display of violence caused War-torn Eve to tremble, but not from fear of Thragg. Instead, she pressed herself even closer to him, seeking the security his overwhelming power provided. Her eyes, which had been fixed on Original Conquest in terror, now watched with something closer to satisfaction as her protector demonstrated his dominance. Below them, the reaction was immediate and uniform. Royal Conquest, already kneeling, bowed his head even lower, pressing his fist to his chest in a gesture of absolute submission. Nolan immediately dropped to one knee, his head bowed respectfully. The evil variants of Mark followed suit, some more quickly than others, but all eventually kneeling in recognition of Thragg's overwhelming authority. Royal Mark and Royal Eve knelt as well, then forcibly pulled Original Mark and Original Eve down beside them. Cold sweat beaded on Original Mark's forehead as he knelt unwillingly, the display of Thragg's power reminding him forcefully of what he sometimes forgot, that despite the Emperor's apparent patience and even kindness, he remained the conqueror of 1,000 galaxies, the terror of the universe. Original Conquest hovered before Thragg, blood dripping from his dislocated jaw, his eyes burning with humiliation and rage. But beneath that anger was something new, fear, the instinctive recognition of a predator far beyond his capacity to challenge. "Go," Thragg commanded, his voice carrying across the desert. "Relay my message to your master before my patience expires completely. Tell him I wish to meet, or I will feed you your own heart before personally traveling to Viltrum to find him." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Consider this, dog, if conflict arises between myself and your master, your homeworld would not survive the encounter. I doubt your Grand Regent wishes for such an outcome. If you possess any loyalty to him at all, you will depart immediately." War-torn Eve watched Original Conquest's face, fascination mingling with satisfaction as she observed his internal struggle. The proud warrior clearly wanted to continue fighting, but self-preservation and, perhaps, genuine concern for his master's interests finally won out. With a growl of pain and frustration, Original Conquest knelt in midair, pressing his remaining functional fist to his chest in a gesture that mirrored Royal Conquest's submission. As "you command," he managed through his shattered jaw, the words slurred and barely intelligible. Without another word, he turned and launched himself skyward, accelerating to escape velocity within seconds, a trail of blood droplets marking his departure. Thragg watched him go, his expression returning to its usual impassive state. Only war-torn Eve, pressed against his chest, could feel the slight relaxation of tension in his muscles as the threat departed. When Original Conquest had vanished from sight, Thragg descended to the desert floor, landing with gentle precision despite his massive frame. The assembled Marks and Eves remained kneeling, none daring to rise without permission. War-torn Eve's eyes darted nervously over the kneeling figures, her breath catching when she spotted Original Mark. Though she knew intellectually that this wasn't her tormentor, the resemblance was enough to send a spike of terror through her. She turned her face into Thragg's chest, unable to look at him. Thragg, sensing her distress, shifted his hold slightly, allowing her to hide her face more effectively against him. His hand moved to the back of her head, gently cradling it in a protective gesture that was becoming increasingly natural to him. "Rise," he commanded the kneeling figures, his deep voice resonating across the desert. They obeyed immediately, though many kept their heads slightly bowed, avoiding direct eye contact with the Emperor. Only Royal Mark and Royal Eve dared to meet his gaze directly, and even they maintained a respectful distance. "The time has come for us to talk," Thragg declared, his eyes sweeping over the assembled group. "There is much to discuss." War-torn Eve's fingers tightened on the battle beast fur, drawing comfort from its softness and the steady heartbeat beneath it. Despite the frightening situation, despite being surrounded by faces that resembled her tormentor, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: safety. As long as she remained in Thragg's arms, no harm could reach her. The Emperor of the Viltrum Empire, the most powerful being in the universe, had become her protector, her guardian, her shield against the horrors she had endured. And that was enough for her. The conference room's silence was heavy with unspoken words. Thragg, seated at the head of the massive table, observed the assembled group with careful attention while war-torn Eve slept peacefully in his arms, her head resting against his chest. His gaze lingered on Original Mark, noting the young hero's unusual silence and the subtle distance he maintained from Original Eve, despite her occasional attempts to catch his eye or shift closer. Though she tried to bridge the gap between them, something held Mark back, a hint of guilt or fear perhaps. Thragg's mind drifted to what he had witnessed mere hours ago, before his journey to save war-torn Eve. Flashback: the warehouse air was thick with tension and the metallic scent of blood. The bodies of Phantom and maskless Mark littered the floor. But it was the scene at the center of the space that held everyone's attention. Mad Angstrom Levy hung suspended in a cage of pink energy, Eve's powers containing him as effectively as any physical restraints. His disfigured face twisted in a mockery of a smile as Original Mark approached, each step deliberate and heavy with purpose. "Back to finish what you started?" Levy taunted, his voice carrying an edge of hysteria. "Going to try to kill me again, Mark? We both know how well that worked last time." Mark stopped before him, his expression unnaturally calm. "I remember," he said quietly. "I remember everything. The guilt of thinking I'd killed you. It ate at me. Made me question myself, my choices, my right to be a hero." "Poor little Mark," Levy sneered. "So concerned with being good, with doing the right thing. Look where that got you. I brought an army of yous who made different choices, who embraced what they really are." "You're right," Mark replied, his voice dropping lower. "I've always tried to do the right thing, to show mercy, to be better than what everyone expected a Viltrumite to be." His eyes hardened. "But you've shown me something important, Levy. Sometimes mercy is just another word for cowardice." Levy's sneer faltered slightly. "What are you babbling about? If I'd really killed you the first time, none of this would have happened. All those people that the evil Marks killed would have killed if Thragg wasn't here. All those who would have died before we stopped them, their deaths would have been on me. Because I wasn't willing to do what needed to be done." Mark stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Levy's face. "But what really opened my eyes? Learning what some versions of me became. What they did to the people they claimed to love." His gaze flickered briefly to Eve, who maintained her hold on Levy despite the growing horror in her expression. Another you showed me a universe where I keep Eve paralyzed, where I... Mark's voice cracked slightly, rage bleeding through his calm facade. Where I torture her, mutilate her, all while claiming it's love. And you helped versions of me that may have been like him to come to my world, put my loved ones at risk. The very thought of some monster you brought doing that to my Eve. I can't even describe it. It makes me sick. It's not my fault if some versions of you are monsters, Levy laughed. The world needed to be shown what you could be. What you really are inside. No, Mark said, stepping even closer. You didn't show what I could be. You showed me what I need to prevent. No more half measures. No more mercy for mad dogs who only understand violence. You won't do it, Levy taunted, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. You're too soft, too worried about being the good guy. Mark's hand shot out, grabbing Levy's head in an iron grip. I'm not worried about being good anymore, he said softly. I'm worried about being right. Eve began but fell silent as she saw the resolve in his eyes. You want to know what I really am inside? Mark asked, his fingers tightening incrementally. I'm my father's son. And sometimes, that means making the hard choices. Levy's eyes widened in genuine fear as he finally realized this wasn't the same Mark who had shown mercy before. The sound of Levy's skull being crushed was surprisingly quiet, a wet crunch followed by silence. Blood and brain matter sprayed across Mark's face and chest, but he didn't flinch, didn't look away. He maintained his grip until there was nothing left of Levy's head but pulp tissue and fragments of bone. When he finally released what remained of the corpse, Eve's energy field caught it, preventing it from falling to the floor. Mark stood there, covered in blood, his expression unreadable. Mark. Eve whispered, letting the body drop as she stepped toward him. He turned away from her, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. It had to be done, he said quietly. And I had to be the one to do it. Present, why should I grant you places in my circle? Thragg asked, his deep voice carefully modulated to avoid disturbing war-torn Eve's sleep, addressing those who remained. For, good Levy had transported the other variants back to their respective dimensions. Each had been given a mission, to grow stronger, to build networks of resistance against their world's Viltrum empires where possible, preparing the way for Thragg's eventual conquest of their realities. Mohawk Mark leaned forward immediately, dispensing with any pretense. Simple. The closer I am to you, the better my chances of staying alive. His eyes moved to war-torn Eve, sleeping peacefully in Thragg's arms. Especially since you've proven to be more than just a mindless beast of power. You're actually capable of caring. He spread his hands on the table, a gesture of complete honesty. I like living. I'll be loyal. I'll risk my life on whatever missions you give me. Because honestly, dying on a mission is infinitely preferable to dying by your hand. Thragg studied him with interest. Such fear, he observed. Yet you seek to serve me? Surely you must hate what inspires such terror. A hollow laugh escaped Mohawk's lips, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Of course I hate Thragg, he said, his hands clenching into fists. But I hate my Thragg. Not you. His eyes took on a haunted look. I still see it all, every moment. My children, my beautiful children. Ripped apart by punches, kicks, teeth. I watched it all happen in the Flaxen dimension. Time moved faster there, but my perception. He swallowed hard. I made myself watch every second. Every death. My own self-inflicted punishment, because it was the only way to stay focused. To remember why that monster had to die. War-torn Eve stirred slightly in Thragg's arms, perhaps sensing the pain in Mohawk's voice. Thragg immediately adjusted his hold, providing more warmth until she settled. He killed everyone. Mohawk's voice cracked with sudden fury. My Eve, my little brother Oliver, my parents, everyone. All because my father and I carried Argal's blood. All because he wanted to keep his rotten throne. He slammed his fist on the table, then immediately looked apologetic when war-torn Eve whimpered in her sleep. Thragg's hand moved soothingly through her hair until she calmed. Some people might be disgusted by what I did, Mohawk continued, his voice lower but no less intense. They might criticize how I won, using my own children as weapons. I don't care. That Thragg was insane. My father foolishly believed in the Empire's promises. He bought into all that talk about improving human life. He even convinced Eve. His voice broke. But it was all lies. That monster wanted to use the same culling method on humanity that decimated Viltrum. Create wars, systematically genocide the weak, and breed the survivors with Viltrumites. He was a mad beast that needed to be put down. Mohawk's gaze moved to Royal Mark and Royal Eve, then to Nolan, and finally back to Thragg. But you're different. You've actually improved your Earth. And him. He gestured at Royal Mark. He has everything I was promised. The love of his life, his father, an emperor who actually seems to love him. The raw emotion in his voice made him forget any pretense of formality. I want that again. I've been studying everything, hell, heaven, any spiritual path that might let me see them again. And you. He met Thragg's eyes directly. You're the strongest being in every universe I've found. That's not coincidence. You're favored by God, by the universe itself. Your fate might be my key to getting them back. He leaned forward, desperation evident in every line of his face. I'll go through hell itself, literally if I have to be part of your fate. To have even a chance of seeing them again. Silence fell over the room as Mohawk's words hung in the air. The other variants shifted uncomfortably, struck by the raw honesty of his confession. Even Original Mark, lost in his own dark thoughts, looked up with a mix of sympathy and understanding. Thragg studied Mohawk for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of genuine respect that made Mohawk's eyes widen. Without comment, Thragg turned his attention to Viltrumite Mark and Omnimark, but the weight of his acknowledgement remained, a silent validation of Mohawk's pain and purpose. Your perspective? Thragg asked Viltrumite Mark, who sat rigidly in his pristine white uniform. My reasons are more strategic, Viltrumite Mark replied, choosing his words carefully. In my universe, he rules from afar through proxies. The Empire's strength is wasted on bureaucracy and protocol rather than true purpose. His eyes moved to war-torn Eve, studying how Thragg cradled her with such care despite his overwhelming power. But you act directly. When there's a threat, you don't dispatch armies, you go yourself. When someone needs protection, you provide it personally. You're what a Viltrumite emperor should be. Thragg's attention shifted to Omnimark, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. And you? Thragg prompted softly. I killed my father, Omnimark whispered, his voice thick with pain. He showed mercy. He wanted to protect Earth instead of conquering it. I thought I was being strong. He looked up, meeting Thragg's eyes. But I was wrong. He understood something I didn't, and I killed him for it. A tear rolled down his cheek. I have nothing left. No direction, no purpose. Just this hole where everything used to be. I didn't really know what to do. He glanced at Mohawk. But if there's even a chance, if what he says about bringing people back is possible. Thragg remained silent for a long moment, his massive hand still moving soothingly through war-torn Eve's hair as he considered their words. Finally, he spoke. I will grant you the opportunities you seek, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of imperial decree. But understand this, I do not offer second chances. Disappoint me, and your fate will make your world's Thragg seem merciful by comparison. The three variants nodded solemnly. Without another word, Thragg rose, cradling war-torn Eve against his chest. He turned and strode from the room, his massive frame somehow moving silently despite its size. Only Royal Eve dared to follow him, hurrying to catch up as he walked down the facility's corridors. How is she? She asked softly, her eyes fixed on her sleeping counterpart. Thragg entered a prepared bedroom, one of several that had been quickly modified to accommodate Viltrumite physiology. With careful movements, he laid war-torn Eve on the large bed. She will heal, he replied quietly to Royal Eve's question, pulling a blanket over war-torn Eve's thin frame. But she needs rest now. They stood in silence, watching war-torn Eve's chest rise and fall with peaceful breaths. Thragg tucked the blanket more securely around her shoulders, his massive hands displaying surprising dexterity with the delicate task. Royal Eve watched this tender interaction, something warm blooming in her chest. Before she could second-guess herself, She stepped forward and threw her arms around Thragg's waist, the highest she could reach. The Emperor froze, genuinely surprised by the unexpected embrace. "You're a good father, Dad," she whispered against his chest. The moment the words left her lips, she felt heat rush to her face. Before Thragg could recover enough to return the embrace, she broke away, backing toward the door with embarrassment written across her features. "I should let her rest," she stammered. "And you too. I mean, good night." She disappeared through the doorway, leaving Thragg standing there, his arms still slightly raised from the aborted attempt to return her hug. Slowly, a soft smile spread across his face, an expression few had ever seen, and none had lived to tell about. His daughter. She had called him father, just as he had secretly hoped she would. The warmth that spread through his chest was unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Thragg moved to the chair beside war-torn Eve's bed, lowering himself into it with careful precision to avoid making noise. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out and gently ran his fingers through her short hair. War-torn Eve stirred slightly at the touch, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. She squinted up at him, and Thragg felt a flash of concern that he had disturbed her rest. But instead of fully waking, she leaned into his touch and drifted back to sleep, a small smile touching her lips. As the night deepened, the Emperor of the Viltrum Empire sat guard over his sleeping daughter, his fingers continuing their gentle motion through her hair. Outside, stars glittered in the infinite darkness, each one a potential world to conquer, a dimension to reshape, a reality to rule. But for now, there was only this moment, the trust of a broken soul finding peace in his protection, the echo of another daughter's words in his heart, and the strange, wonderful feeling of being needed for more than just his strength. And for the first time in millennia, Thragg found himself perfectly content to let the universe wait. The morning sun cast gentle shadows through the GDA facility hospital room window as Thragg helped war-torn Eve dress for the day. His massive hands moved with surprising delicacy as he assisted her into comfortable clothes that had been specially selected, loose-fitting and soft against her sensitive skin. Eve's fingers trembled slightly as she attempted to button her cardigan, frustration flickering across her face at her body's weakness. Without comment, Thragg's hands covered hers, gently taking over the task. "Your strength will return," he stated simply, his deep voice pitched low and soothing. "The cellular regeneration is proceeding as expected." Eve nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on her lap. She felt unclean, tainted. The medical procedures in the Emperor's world recently had healed her physical wounds and scars, but she could still feel the phantom touch of her Mark's hands and still see the cruel satisfaction in his eyes as he marked her flesh. And now here was Thragg, the Emperor himself, helping her dress like a child. The shame of it burned in her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her speech having returned to its normal state these past days, the words escaping before she could stop them. "You shouldn't have to. I'm not worthy of." Thagg's hand stilled on the final button. His penetrating gaze studied her face, seeing beyond her words to the pain beneath. "Worth," he said after a moment, "is not determined by what has been done to you." Eve's breath caught in her throat. How did he always seem to know exactly what she was thinking? Was she that transparent, that weak? But there was no judgment in his eyes, no disgust at her vulnerability. Only that steady, unwavering presence that had become her anchor in the storm of recovery. "I thought." She began hesitantly, her voice stronger than it had been days ago but still carrying the roughness of disuse. "I thought Viltrumites valued strength above all else." "We do," Thragg confirmed, helping her into the wheelchair that would allow her to leave the medical wing for the first time. "But strength takes many forms. Survival is one of them." He wheeled her toward the door, his movements careful and measured. Eve's hands gripped the armrests tightly, anxiety building in her chest as they approached the exit. "What if?" She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "What if people see you like this? The Emperor, pushing a broken girl in a wheelchair. Won't it make you seem weak?" The question had been haunting her since she'd first called him Dad in that moment of desperate need. She'd manipulated him, using his relationship with her counterpart to secure his protection. The guilt of it ate at her constantly. To her surprise, Thragg actually chuckled, a sound so unexpected it made her jump slightly. "Child," he said, his voice carrying a warmth she was still adjusting to. "I wear the hide of battle beast as a coat. My strength is beyond question. A few hours spent caring for my daughter will not change that." "Daughter." The word sent a complex wave of emotions through Eve. She'd always wanted a father, one who truly acted like one towards her, one she could depend on when times were tough, one that actually loved her, but she never had such a person in her life. Hearing these words made her feel joy, fear, unworthiness, and desperate hope, all tangled together in her chest. They emerged from the medical wing into a bright corridor. Eve tensed, expecting to see others, but the hallway was empty. "I have cleared this section of the facility," Thragg explained, sensing her anxiety. "We will encounter no one unless you wish it." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by more guilt. Here she was, forcing the Emperor of the Universe to arrange his schedule around her fears. "You don't have to dash," she began. "Believe me, I know," Thragg interrupted gently. "No one can make me do anything. I choose to." They moved through the building in comfortable silence, eventually reaching an exit that led to a private garden. Eve blinked in the natural sunlight, the first she'd felt on her skin in months. To her continued surprise, Thragg was dressed not in his usual imperial regalia, but in civilian clothes, a simple black suit that somehow managed to accommodate his massive frame while still looking elegant. The battle beast coat would draw unnecessary attention. "Without it I am not as recognizable," he explained, noting her curious glance. He positioned her wheelchair near a flowering bush, angling it so she could feel the sun on her face while remaining partially sheltered by shade. Eve watched as he settled onto a reinforced bench nearby, his massive frame making the industrial-strength furniture look like dollhouse accessories. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly, the question that had been burning inside her finally escaping. Thragg raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to elaborate. "You're the Emperor," she continued, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "You have an empire to run, worlds to conquer, and dimensions to explore. Why waste time with me? Is that what you believe you are?" Thragg asked, his voice carefully neutral. "A waste of time?" Eve looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm broken," she whispered. "Damaged. I can't even dress myself properly. I manipulated you by calling you father, and used your feelings for the other Eve to make you protect me. I'm dirty." The last word came out as barely a breath, but Thragg's enhanced hearing caught it easily. "Look at me," he commanded, though his tone remained gentle. When Eve hesitated, he moved from the bench to kneel beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level, a gesture that struck her with its deliberate humility. The Emperor of the Universe, kneeling beside her. "What was done to you does not define you," he stated, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The actions you took to survive do not make you unclean. And your need for protection does not make you weak." Tears welled in Eve's eyes, but she forced them back. "But I used you," she insisted. "I saw how you cared for the other Eve and me. I took advantage of that." "Did you?" Thragg asked, his penetrating gaze seeming to see straight through to her soul. "Or did you recognize something true, even if you didn't fully understand it at the time?" Eve frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "When you called me father," Thragg explained, "you were not creating something false. You were acknowledging something that already existed, my capacity and desire to protect you. To care for you. To be the father you deserve." Thragg himself was surprised by his own words. Not in the way that he did not believe them, but that he actually uttered them. He began to wonder in that moment whether deep down he wanted this, to actually show his care outward, so openly, rather than hide it behind his normal exterior, the one formed since Argal's death. On Viltrum, he of course, never showed this much emotion even with his father, but even then, it was at least there, unspoken or not. Now, he realizes in some way the helping of war-torn Eve, no matter how sincere, in some way was also an excuse he gave himself to actually show the feelings he's buried deep, the feelings that made him the son of a wise emperor previously, as well as a human in his first life. A sob escaped Eve's throat before she could stop it. "But I'm not her," she protested weakly. "I'm not your Eve." "No," Thragg agreed. "You are your own person, with your own path. But that does not make you any less my daughter." The tears came freely now, rolling down Eve's cheeks as years of pain and fear and loneliness crashed through the wall she'd built around her heart. Without hesitation, Thragg gathered her into his arms, lifting her from the wheelchair to cradle her against his chest. Eve buried her face in his suit jacket, her thin frame shaking with sobs. I'm scared, she admitted between gasping breaths. Scared of being weak, of making you vulnerable, of not being worthy of your protection. Your fear is understandable, Thragg replied, his deep voice rumbling through his chest beneath her ear. But unnecessary. My protection is not conditional upon your worthiness. It is given freely, as a father's love should be. They remained like that for several minutes, Thragg holding her as she cried, his massive hand running soothingly through her short hair. When her tears finally subsided, Eve felt lighter somehow. As if some of the darkness that had been poisoning her soul had been washed away by her father's acceptance. Father. The word felt right now, not like a manipulation or a desperate plea, but like a truth she'd been afraid to acknowledge. After their emotional conversation in the garden, Thragg noticed Eve watching a family having lunch at a nearby cafe. Her expression held a mixture of longing and fear that tugged at something deep within him. Would you like to try? He asked softly. Eve's fingers tightened on the wheelchair's armrests. I don't know if I can. Then we shall make it easier, Thragg decided. He pulled out a phone, a device that looked comically small in his massive hand, and made a brief call. 20 minutes later, they entered a small restaurant, one he went to with Amanda a couple of times in his own world. The entire place had been cleared of other customers, with only a single elderly waiter remaining. Everything is prepared as requested, sir, the waiter said with a respectful bow, showing no question at all to Thragg's identity or the like. Perfectly understanding some things are not his right to know or ask about. Eve realized Thragg must have arranged this in advance, perhaps even bought the restaurant outright to ensure her comfort. The thought brought fresh tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. The meal was simple but perfect, pasta that reminded Eve of happier times, bread still warm from the oven, and a chocolate dessert that made her realize how long it had been since she truly enjoyed food. You're not eating much, she observed, watching Thragg take careful bites with utensils that seemed like toys in his hands. Viltrumites require less sustenance, he replied. But meals serve purposes beyond mere nutrition. They are connection. After lunch, they visited a small bookstore that had also been cleared for their visit. Eve's eyes lit up at the sight of familiar titles, books that had once been her escape, her comfort. Thragg, noting her interest, began systematically purchasing every book she glanced at for more than a few seconds. Dad, she protested weakly, the word feeling more natural now. She knew intellectually that such a development was fast, very fast, but she couldn't really care less. She wanted a dad, and Thragg was choosing to be one to her, so she would welcome it with open arms. You don't have to dash, I am aware, he replied, adding another stack to his growing pile. I choose to, he stated, repeating his earlier words. They spent the afternoon in a private garden, Eve reading while Thragg sat beside her, his massive presence keeping her fears at bay. Sometimes he would comment on the books, revealing a surprisingly deep knowledge of human literature. As the sun began to set, Eve felt fatigue creeping in, her body still adjusting to extended activity. Thragg noticed immediately. Time to rest, he declared, no room for argument in his tone as he took her back to the GDA facility, flying the both of them with care. Back in her room, he helped her into bed with the same gentle care he'd shown all day. As he tucked the blankets around her, Eve caught his hand. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Thragg's expression softened imperceptibly. Sleep, he commanded gently. I will return soon. Eve drifted off, feeling truly safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. Through half-closed eyes, she watched as Thragg left, and then sleep took her. The Emperor himself with speed went to his room and changed, his civilian clothes disappearing and his normal attire with the imperial regalia, the battle beast coat, taking its place. He went to the window, opened it and launched himself into the night sky, his massive form disappearing into the clouds above. High above the city, Thragg hovered motionless in the thin air, his enhanced vision scanning the horizon. A somewhat familiar, yet in some ways unfamiliar, soul presence approached, one he had been expecting. You took your time, he stated without turning as the figure drew near. So, a voice identical to his own replied from behind him, you are the one who sent that dog Conquest with his tail between his legs. Thragg turned slowly to face his counterpart, this world's Grand Regent Thragg, ruler of the Viltrum Empire. The night sky above Chicago held its breath as two versions of the most powerful being in the universe faced each other. Emperor Thragg, the battle beast coat flowing regally around his shoulders, regarded his counterpart with clinical detachment. Grand Regent Thragg, clad in the same uniform, the only difference being that he was wearing the sash-like red coat instead of the battle beast one, returned the scrutiny. Though identical in appearance, subtle differences marked them. The Emperor carried himself with a presence that spoke of absolute certainty, while the Grand Regent's posture held a rigid formality that bordered on tension. For a long moment, neither spoke. They studied each other as only beings of their caliber could, analyzing not just physical characteristics, but the very essence of what made them different across realities. Finally, Emperor Thragg broke the silence. "It seems you have not come alone." As if summoned by his words, 44 white-clad figures descended from the clouds, arranging themselves in perfect formation behind Grand Regent Thragg. The last remnants of the Viltrum Empire in this reality, each bearing the unmistakable pride and power of their race. General Craig, this world's version, moved to stand beside his Grand Regent, his scarred face set in fierce loyalty. "Of course not. We would never forsake our ruler." "Neither would we." The words came from above, carrying across the night air with quiet certainty. Nolan descended through the clouds, his presence somehow both humble and commanding. Behind him came Mohawk Mark, Viltrumite Mark, Royal Mark, Original Mark, Roberta, and Conquest, each taking position behind Emperor Thragg with practiced precision. Silence fell once more, heavier than before. Two forces representing fundamentally different interpretations of Viltrumite power and purpose, facing each other in the dark skies above an unsuspecting city. The tension built as seconds stretched into minutes, neither side willing to break the fragile peace, yet both prepared for its inevitable shattering. Grand Regent Thragg finally broke the silence, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Conquest delivered your message." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You find my methods lacking?" Emperor Thragg's gaze swept across the cityscape below, taking in the sprawling metropolis with its millions of unaware inhabitants. His gesture encompassed not just Chicago, but the world at large. "Look around you," he stated, his deep voice resonating with imperial authority. "This world remains unconquered, not elevated, not evolved. There is no peace here, only chaos masked as order." He turned his penetrating gaze back to his counterpart. "You're Nolan, slaughtering thousands, instilling fear that breeds only resistance. You're Anissa, failing to sway Mark through methods that speak more of desperation than strategy. And Conquest." His eyes flickered briefly to the scarred warrior standing behind him. "Sending a mad dog with no true parameters, allowing him to rampage without purpose or direction. All of it speaks to a fundamental failure of leadership." The assembled Viltrumites shifted uneasily at these words, though none dared interrupt. "You should have acted as I did," Emperor Thragg continued, his voice hardening. "Personally. Directly. With clear purpose and vision. Instead, you sit upon a cold throne, distant and ineffective, delegating tasks that demand an emperor's direct attention." His final words fell like thunder in the night sky. "Argal, our father, would see you as a disgrace." The effect was immediate. Grand Regent Thragg's usually impassive expression contorted with fury. His fists clenched at his sides, generating a shockwave that made his followers stumble in the air, though they quickly recovered their positions. "You rage like an undisciplined child in front of truth," Emperor Thragg commented, unmoved by the display. "No wonder you remain merely Grand Regent, unacknowledged by Argal's blood as Emperor, unlike myself." The words brought sudden stillness to the assembled Viltrumites. Grand Regent Thragg's rage gave way to confusion, an emotion rarely seen on his features. "What do you mean?" this world's Craig demanded, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Have you found Argal's blood?" "Yes," Emperor Thragg confirmed simply. "Nolan is the biological son of Argal." The revelation hit the assembled Viltrumites like a physical blow. Murmurs of shock and confusion rippled through their ranks, the perfect formation wavering as they processed this information. "Impossible," Craig snarled, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Nolan is a traitor to the Empire." "No," Emperor Thragg corrected, his tone carrying absolute certainty. "It is because you have failed to uphold Argal's wise ways that his blood has forsaken you. Your empire clings to outdated methods, forsaking evolution for mere tradition." Nolan stepped forward then, his presence drawing all eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of both heritage and choice. "My emperor, my older brother, has upheld our father's ways. That is why I did not desire the throne, as I am not suited to rule as he is." His gaze fixed on Grand Regent Thragg, carrying not hatred but something perhaps more cutting, disappointment. "But I cannot say the same for you. All I see is a pale imitation of my emperor." The words hung in the air like physical things, their weight pressing down on all present. Two versions of the same mighty being, divided not just by normally universes, but by fundamentally different understandings of power and purpose. And between them, the legacy of Emperor Argal, a legacy that would determine the fate of not just this world, but in the future countless others across the multiverse. Grand Regent Thragg's eyes narrowed dangerously, his voice carrying a deadly calm. "You claim he is Argal's son? Where is your proof?" "The proof," Emperor Thragg replied, "lies in who we are. As you clearly see, in my reality, I rule as Emperor. You know we would not do this without truly knowing our father's wants. We have both sought his blood for millennia, and I have found it in Nolan. The empire I rule thrives, expanding not through mere conquest but through elevation." He gestured to those who stood behind him. "Look at these variants of Mark Grayson, Argal's grandsons. In their worlds, leadership like yours led only to destruction and chaos. Yet in my world, Mark serves the Empire willingly, understanding the true purpose of Viltrumite power." "And what purpose is that?" Grand Regent Thragg demanded, though something in his voice suggested he already feared the answer. "The same purpose Argal envisioned," Emperor Thragg stated. "Not domination for its own sake, but the elevation of all species to their highest potential. Strength tempered by wisdom. Power guided by purpose." His penetrating gaze swept across the assembled Viltrumites. "How many worlds have you conquered, only to leave them in ruins? How many species have you subjugated, only to watch them wither under oppression? Is this the legacy Argal intended for his empire?" The question struck home. Several of the 44 warriors exchanged uncertain glances, their absolute faith in their leader showing the first cracks of doubt. "You speak of Argal as if you knew him better than me," Grand Regent Thragg growled, though his voice held a note of defensive anger. "You are merely another version of me, nothing more." "No," Emperor Thragg corrected, his voice carrying a weight of certainty that made even his counterpart pause. "I am what you could have been, had you not lost your way. I am what Argal saw in us when he chose to raise us as his son." He took a step forward in the air, his battle beast coat rippling in the night breeze. "The question now is simple. Will you continue down this path of stagnation, or will you acknowledge the truth before you?" Grand Regent Thragg's response came not in words but in action. With blinding speed, he launched himself at Emperor Thragg, his fist aimed directly at his counterpart's face. Emperor Thragg didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, he caught the Grand Regent's fist with casual ease, the impact creating a shockwave that rippled through the night sky. "As I said," Emperor Thragg stated calmly, still holding his counterpart's fist. "Undisciplined. Reactive rather than strategic. You attack out of emotion rather than purpose." The air around them began to vibrate as both beings exerted their power. The very atmosphere seemed to bend under the pressure of their combined strength. "You dare lecture me about purpose?" Grand Regent Thragg snarled, throwing his other fist forward. "I have maintained the Empire's strength for millennia." Emperor Thragg caught the second fist as easily as the first. "Maintained? No. You have preserved it in amber, letting it grow stagnant and brittle. The Empire is not meant to simply endure, it is meant to evolve." Behind them, the two groups of Viltrumites tensed, ready to join the battle. But before they could move, Emperor Thragg's voice rang out, "Stand down. All of you." To everyone's surprise, both groups obeyed instinctively, even the Grand Regent's followers responding to the sheer command in his voice. "This is between us," Emperor Thragg continued, his grip on Grand Regent Thragg's fists tightening incrementally. "As it should be." The battle erupted with explosive force. Grand Regent Thragg wrenched his hands free and unleashed a barrage of punches, each strike carrying enough power to shatter worlds. Emperor Thragg met him blow for blow, their fists colliding in midair with thunderous impacts that sent shockwaves across the Chicago skyline. The two titans moved with identical precision, their combat styles mirror images of each other. Every punch, every kick, every movement was executed with millennia of experience behind it. The air itself seemed to crack under the force of their exchange. They appear evenly matched, Viltrumite Mark observed, his eyes tracking the blur of motion above them. The battle beast coat and red sash became indistinguishable streaks as the two Thraggs traded blows at speeds that defied comprehension. Mohawk Mark shook his head, his expression troubled.
No, something's wrong. Really damn wrong.
This isn't right at all. A particularly vicious exchange sent both combatants spiraling through the air. Grand Regent Thragg's fist connected with Emperor Thragg's jaw, snapping his head back. In return, Emperor Thragg drove his knee into his counterpart's solar plexus, sending him crashing through a cloud bank.
What do you mean?
Royal Mark asked, glancing at Mohawk.
They're both Thragg. Shouldn't they be equal?
Equal. Mohawk's laugh held no humor. I've seen the Emperor's soul. He's dozens of times more powerful than this Thragg. This doesn't make any sense. Above them, the battle continued. Grand Regent Thragg emerged from the clouds with renewed fury, his hands clasped together in a hammer blow that caught Emperor Thragg in the chest. The impact sent the Emperor plummeting toward the city below. At the last moment, Emperor Thragg recovered, the battle beast coat whipping around him as he arrested his fall mere feet above a skyscraper. He spat blood to the side, he'd bitten his tongue from the impact. What is he planning? Mohawk muttered, his eyes narrowing as he studied the Emperor's face.
Then he saw it, a smile.
Not the cold, calculating expression they were accustomed to from their Emperor, but something savage and anticipatory. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, yet his eyes held a predatory gleam that sent chills down Mohawk's spine.
Oh no,
Mohawk whispered, realization dawning. He's actually playing with him. The Emperor launched himself back into the fray, meeting Grand Regent Thragg's charge with one of his own. Their collision split the clouds above Chicago, the sound of their impact rolling across the city like thunder. But now that Mohawk had seen it, he couldn't unsee it, the subtle tells in Emperor Thragg's movements and the way he was deliberately matching his counterpart's speed and power rather than overwhelming him. The savage smile that grew wider with each exchange. The Emperor was toying with his prey, and only Mohawk, who understood his true power better than most, realized the terror that was about to be unleashed. For the Emperor was enjoying himself. The night sky boomed as the Thraggs clashed. Their initial exchange sent shockwaves across Chicago, each impact creating thunderous booms that echoed through the city. Grand Regent Thragg launched a flurry of strikes, each blow carrying enough force to kill any other Viltrumite instantly. Emperor Thragg met him perfectly, matching every attack with equal force. As they separated briefly, Emperor Thragg noted the battle beast coat had become slightly disheveled during their exchange. His hands moved to the garment with surprising gentleness, considering the violence they had just unleashed. "Roberta," he called, his deep voice carrying an unexpected warmth that made the woman in question straighten attentively. "This requires your protection." He removed the coat with deliberate care, folding it with precision before tossing it to her. Roberta caught it with both her hands, immediately creating a protective field that would keep the precious garment pristine. A slight blush colored her cheeks as she cradled the coat, secretly smelling it as her fingers unconsciously stroked the white fur. "I'll keep it safe, Emperor," she promised. "I know you will," Emperor Thragg replied, his tone carrying that same warmth that seemed reserved for her and few others. His mustache twitched slightly in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Grand Regent Thragg observed this exchange with barely concealed contempt. "Sentiment," he spat, his voice hard with disapproval. "You've grown soft, allowing such weakness to cloud your judgment." Emperor Thragg's expression returned to its usual impassivity as he turned back to face his counterpart. "You mistake connection for weakness," he stated. "Another failure in your understanding." Their identical forms hung motionless in the air, now both in the traditional white-red uniform of Viltrum's highest authority, though the Grand Regent still wore his red sash while the Emperor's chest remained bare where the coat had been. The Grand Regent attacked first, his fist aimed at Emperor Thragg's face, which he met with a strike with identical form, their fists colliding in midair with enough force to create a visible distortion in the atmosphere. What followed was a mirror match. Each punch, each kick, each tactical maneuver was met with its perfect counter. The two Thraggs moved through the night sky like twin forces of nature, their combat creating shockwaves that rattled buildings for miles around. "They're physically and technically perfectly matched," Viltrumite Mark observed, his eyes tracking the blur of motion above. "Every move is countered exactly."
Mohawk Mark shook his head, his expression still troubled. "No,
He's studying himself. Look at his eyes. Indeed, Emperor Thragg's gaze held an analytical look even as he exchanged world-shattering blows with his counterpart. Each strike was not just an attack but an experiment, testing the weaknesses and limitations of his own fighting style by experiencing it from the opposing perspective. The Grand Regent launched a complex combination, a feint to the left followed by a right cross and an uppercut. Emperor Thragg responded with the exact same sequence, their fists meeting at each point of contact with thunderous impact. "You mock me," Grand Regent Thragg snarled, his composure cracking slightly. "Fight with your own style, not this pale imitation." "I fight as you do," Emperor Thragg replied calmly, "to understand what I once was. To see the flaws in my former self." The Grand Regent's response was a sudden increase in tempo, his attacks becoming faster and more aggressive. Emperor Thragg matched him perfectly, though those watching closely might have noticed him deliberately taking certain hits, not out of necessity, but choice. Each blow that landed seemed to satisfy something in the Emperor's gaze. Each impact was a data point, each exchange a lesson in his own previous limitations. Blood began to flow from both combatants, though neither showed any sign of slowing. The night sky became their arena, their battle transforming the very air around them with the force of their exchange. A particularly vicious exchange sent both Thraggs crashing through a cloud bank, their impact dispersing the vapor. The Grand Regent emerged first, his uniform torn and bloodied but his expression showing only cold fury. Emperor Thragg followed, blood trickling from several wounds that seemed to heal slightly slower than usual, a deliberate choice that didn't escape Mohawk Mark's notice. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. "He's letting himself get hurt. But why?" The battle intensified as the Grand Regent, frustrated by his counterpart's mirroring tactics, began incorporating more complex attack patterns. His movements became less predictable, drawing on centuries of combat experience against various opponents across the galaxy. Emperor Thragg met each innovation with perfect replication, though now he was allowing more hits to land. Blood flowed more freely from his wounds, yet his expression remained one of calm concentration rather than pain or concern. "Your technique is flawed," Emperor Thragg stated between exchanges, his voice carrying easily despite the thunderous impacts of their combat. "You rely too heavily on overwhelming force, neglecting the subtleties of molecular control." To demonstrate, he caught one of the Grand Regent's punches, allowing the force to travel through his body in a way that seemed to disperse it harmlessly. "Observe," he commanded, then struck back with identical force but perfect molecular balance, causing his counterpart to stagger in the air. The Grand Regent's response was a roar of fury and a barrage of attacks that would have obliterated lesser beings. Emperor Thragg took these hits deliberately, each impact driving him back, blood now flowing freely from multiple wounds. "He's going to get himself killed," Original Mark muttered, concern evident in his voice. Roberta, still cradling the battle beast coat, watched. "No," she said softly, her instincts informing her of something magnificent soon to happen. "He's implementing something new. Something evolutionary." Above them, the battle had reached a new level of intensity. The Grand Regent, sensing his opponent's apparent weakening, pressed his advantage with increasing savagery. Emperor Thragg's blood painted the night sky, yet his expression remained one of focused concentration rather than pain or fear. The savage smile that had appeared earlier returned to his face, growing wider with each devastating blow he allowed to land. Suddenly, Emperor Thragg's demeanor shifted. In a display of speed that made his previous movements seem glacial, he vanished from the Grand Regent's sight, reappearing behind him before anyone could track the movement. His hand closed around the Grand Regent's face with casual ease, the sudden show of superior strength causing his counterpart's eyes to widen in shock. "This arena has grown too small for our entertainment," Emperor Thragg stated, his voice carrying a subtle hint of excitement. "Let us find somewhere more appropriate." With that, he hurled the Grand Regent skyward with devastating force. The impact alone created a sonic boom that shattered windows across Chicago. Before the Grand Regent could stabilize himself, Emperor Thragg was behind him again, his speed now deliberately reduced to match his counterparts. What followed was a brutal ascent through Earth's atmosphere. Emperor Thragg drove his counterpart higher with a relentless barrage of strikes, each punch calculated to maintain their upward trajectory while inflicting maximum damage. The Grand Regent attempted to counter but found himself caught in a rhythm of attacks that kept him off balance and ascending. As they broke through the atmosphere into the cold void of space, Emperor Thragg's savage smile widened. With precise timing, he delivered a kick to the Grand Regent's chest that sent him hurtling away from Earth at incredible speed. For a brief moment, Emperor Thragg allowed his true speed to show again, crossing the vast distance instantly to grab his counterpart's head in an iron grip. Without pause, he altered their course toward the sun, accelerating to speeds that made light itself seem slow. They passed through the star's corona, then its surface, their Viltrumite physiology protecting them from the intense heat and pressure. Luckily their clothes were durable enough to survive. The Grand Regent struggled in his grip, but Emperor Thragg's hold remained unbreakable as they emerged on the other side, shooting through space toward a distant solar system. Their impact on the desolate planet created a crater visible from orbit, the force of their arrival reshaping the landscape for miles around. As dust and debris rained down around them, Emperor Thragg released his grip, once again limiting his speed and strength to match his counterparts. "Now," he said, his voice carrying across the alien wasteland, "we can continue without concern for collateral damage." The battle resumed as their attacks reshaped the barren landscape with each exchange. But something had changed in Emperor Thragg's approach. He was deliberately leaving himself open, allowing the Grand Regent's strikes to land with even more force than before, and this time, not even blocking. Blood sprayed across the alien soil as the Emperor took hit after hit, his healing factor seemingly suppressed, allowing wounds to linger and accumulate. Yet that savage smile never left his face, growing wider with each devastating blow. "Why?" Grand Regent Thragg demanded, driving his fist through his counterpart's shoulder. "I saw your true speed. Your real strength. Why do you allow this farce to continue?" Emperor Thragg took a knee, blood pouring from numerous wounds across his body. The Grand Regent stood over him, confusion and fury warring in his expression. "You mock me with this display," the Grand Regent snarled. "Show me your true power. Fight me as an equal." Slowly, deliberately, Emperor Thragg raised his head. His smile had transformed into something primal, a predator's grin that showed all his teeth, stained red with his own blood. The expression sent an unexpected chill down the Grand Regent's spine, an instinctive warning that despite his apparent vulnerability, the being before him was anything but prey. "You still don't understand," Emperor Thragg said, his voice carrying a hint of something that made even the hardened Grand Regent take an involuntary step back. "This isn't about mockery. This is about evolution." He rose to his feet, blood continuing to flow from his wounds, yet his posture remained one of absolute control. "Every blow you land, every wound you inflict, they're not weakening me. They're making me stronger." The Grand Regent's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. "What have you done to yourself?" Emperor Thragg's blood-stained grin widened further. "Let me show you." The battle once again continued. Emperor Thragg's apparent vulnerability seemed to infuriate the Grand Regent further, his attacks becoming increasingly vicious as his counterpart continued to weather devastating blows with that unsettling smile. Mountains crumbled as they crashed through them, and valleys formed where their impacts met the ground. Emperor Thragg's blood painted the landscape, yet his expression remained one of anticipation rather than pain or concern. Finally, the Grand Regent saw what appeared to be a fatal opening. The warrior that he is, immediately noticing it and capitalizing on it, drove his fist through Emperor Thragg's chest, fingers closing around his still-beating heart. "Die," the Grand Regent snarled, ripping the organ from his counterpart's body. Blood poured from the massive wound as Emperor Thragg dropped to his knees. But instead of falling, instead of dying, he began to laugh, a deep, resonant sound that echoed across the alien wasteland. "Finally," Emperor Thragg said, blood spilling from his mouth with each word. "You should know, with my control over molecular structure, I can survive without a heart for at least another day. But this..." His grin widened impossibly. "This is exactly what I needed." Before the Grand Regent's stunned eyes, Emperor Thragg's body began to change. For unknown to all, the Emperor had finally understood and integrated the ability of Alan the alien. The ability to become stronger after nearing death. His muscles swelled, his frame expanding as his already impressive height increased. The wound in his chest began to close, new tissue forming at an accelerated rate. A new heart materialized within his chest cavity, constructed from perfectly arranged atoms under his absolute control. When he rose to his full height, he stood noticeably taller than his counterpart, his enhanced frame radiating power that made his previous strength seem insignificant by comparison. "Do you understand now?" Emperor Thragg asked, his voice deeper than before. "Every near-death experience makes me stronger. And you, my other self, just gave me exactly what I wanted. The Grand Regent took an involuntary step back, for the first time feeling something he had never experienced before: fear. Now, the Emperor began as he cracked his neck to the side with his hand, taking a step forward. Ready for round 2. And with these words spoken, he simply, by blowing air out his mouth, caused the Grand Regent, who, shocked by the wind blast appearing in front of his face, had raised his hand protectively in front of himself, to fly as he was unable to stop himself as he flew into the distance, flailing like a child. The Emperor, seeing this, spit a bit of blood in his mouth to the side and, with a grin full of teeth, took another heavy step forward, imprinting his foot into the earth as it quaked, and sped after him. Playtime was over. The alien landscape shattered as Emperor Thragg seized the Grand Regent by the back of his head, his newly enhanced strength making his previous power seem insignificant by comparison. The difference between them was no longer subtle, it was absolute. Finally, the true purpose of their battle could be addressed. "Let me show you what true leadership means," Emperor Thragg stated, his voice carrying both authority and an underlying current of frustration. Without further warning, he drove his counterpart's face through a mountain range, pulverizing solid rock into dust. The trench he carved dragged on for miles, visible from orbit as a testament to his overwhelming power. The Grand Regent attempted to resist, his own considerable strength meaningless against his enhanced counterpart. Emperor Thragg lifted him from the devastation only to hurl him skyward with casual ease. Before the Grand Regent could stabilize himself, the Emperor appeared above him, his speed making his previous movement seem as slow as a snail. The downward strike that followed sent the Grand Regent plummeting into the planet's surface with such force that the impact reshaped the continent. Mountains rose and fell as tectonic plates shifted under the tremendous force, creating a new valley with the Grand Regent at its center. Emperor Thragg descended into the crater, his enhanced frame casting a long shadow over his fallen counterpart. "Submit," he commanded, "accept guidance. Follow the path our father would have wanted for both of us." The Grand Regent struggled to his feet, blood pouring from numerous wounds that would have killed any lesser being. His uniform hung in tatters, yet his eyes burned with undiminished defiance. "Never," he spat, blood staining his mustache. "I am Thragg. I bow to no one, not even myself. Why do you persist in this foolishness?" Emperor Thragg demanded, crossing the distance between them in an instant. His hand closed around the Grand Regent's throat, lifting him as easily as one might lift a child. "Why cling to methods that have failed? That would make our father ashamed." He began using the Grand Regent's body as a weapon against the landscape, each impact reshaping the terrain. Mountains crumbled as he slammed his counterpart through them. Valleys formed where he drove him into the ground. The planet itself seemed to groan under the assault, yet the Grand Regent's defiance remained unbroken. "Our father wanted elevation, not stagnation." Emperor Thragg roared, his frustration building with each futile impact. "Progress, not mere conquest. The Empire should evolve, not simply endure. Why can't you understand this simple truth?" The Grand Regent's response was to spit blood in his face, a gesture of such profound disrespect that Emperor Thragg momentarily froze in shock. Then his expression darkened, and true fury began to build in his eyes. "You speak of father's path," the Grand Regent snarled through bloodied teeth, "but where did that path lead him? To death. Betrayed by those he sought to elevate." His words carried the weight of millennia of bitterness. "I watched him die because he was too focused on evolution to see the daggers aimed at his back." Emperor Thragg's grip loosened slightly, understanding flickering in his eyes. "So that's it," he said softly. "You abandoned his vision not just out of pride, but fear. Fear that his way would lead to the same end. Fear." The Grand Regent laughed, a harsh sound that carried no humor. "No, brother. Understanding. The strong survive. The weak plot. That is the only truth that matters. Your way, his way, will end as his did. In betrayal and death." With a roar of frustration that shook the alien world, Emperor Thragg hurled his counterpart to the ground with devastating force. The impact created a crater miles deep, the planet's crust fracturing from the sheer power behind the throw. "Then you understand nothing," Emperor Thragg declared, descending into the crater. "Father died because the Empire wasn't ready for his vision. But now, with my power, with my understanding, we can make it ready. We can fulfill what he started." You're a fool, the Grand Regent spat. As he was a fool. And you'll die as he died. Very well, Emperor Thragg snarled, his patience finally exhausted. If you only understand strength, then I will show you power beyond your comprehension. Emperor Thragg's massive frame began to change as he accelerated his atoms to impossible speeds. The air around him started to shimmer, then ignite, as his body generated heat even more than the sun's core. His form transformed into living flame, a being of pure white fire that still maintained his distinctive shape, his mustache and features visible in the inferno. The planet's surface began to disintegrate instantly. Rock melted to magma, then vaporized into nothingness. The atmosphere itself started to burn away as Emperor Thragg's mere presence rewrote the laws of physics in his immediate vicinity. The devastation spread outward in waves, the planet dying by degrees around them. The Grand Regent's uniform burned to ash in seconds, his Viltrumite flesh beginning to char and blister despite their race's legendary durability. Yet he stood his ground, watching his own skin begin to melt from his bones with an expression of grim fascination. This is your final chance, Emperor Thragg's voice boomed through the inferno, carrying both power and regret. Submit to my guidance, or be destroyed. Choose now. Let me show you that Father's way can work, with the proper strength to enforce it. For a moment they stood there in silence, as everything was obliterated around them, the star of this solar system even being subtly pulled towards the Emperor because of the gravitational field he now generated. Though after the moment passed, to his shock, the Grand Regent didn't retreat. Instead, he stumbled forward through the devastating heat, throwing himself against Emperor Thragg's burning form in a final, defiant embrace. His flesh sizzled on contact, yet he held tight, refusing to let go even as his body began to dissolve. There can be only one ruler of Viltrum, the Grand Regent stated, his flesh melting from his bones, yet his voice remained unwavering. I accept my defeat, but not your way. I die as I lived, unbowed, unbroken. Perhaps Father's way was right, perhaps yours is. But I'll never know, will I? Emperor Thragg's eyes widened in shock, immediately trying to decelerate his atoms to stop the heat that was destroying his counterpart. But it was too late, the process had gone too far, the Grand Regent's body was already breaking down at the molecular level. Know this, brother, the Grand Regent continued as his body burned away, his skeleton beginning to glow white-hot. I will be watching from whatever hell awaits me. Perhaps we'll meet again, and I'll see if Father's vision, your vision, truly was right. But I'll never submit, not even in death. The weak die, the strong survive. That's the only truth I've ever known. You fool, Emperor Thragg growled, his voice carrying both fury and respect as he watched his counterpart choose obliteration over surrender. Your pride condemns you. Your fear blinds you to the possibility of something greater. My pride defines me, the Grand Regent managed, his skull beginning to melt. As it defines us. Remember that, brother, when those you elevate, turn on you, as they did, Father. Those were his final words as his body disintegrated completely, leaving only a partially melted skeleton that glowed with residual heat. The bones themselves began to liquefy under the continued onslaught of Emperor Thragg's power. Emperor Thragg returned to his normal form, naked but unharmed, as he caught his counterpart's skull before it could completely liquefy. He stood there in the devastation, holding all that remained of his other self, his expression a complex mixture of anger, respect, and something almost like grief. Around him, the planet continued to die. His brief display of power had destabilized its core, and now the surface was breaking apart. Magma burst through massive fissures in the ground as the atmosphere burned away into space. Soon, nothing would remain but scattered debris, a cosmic grave marker for the Grand Regent's final act of defiance. Rest well, brother, Emperor Thragg murmured to the skull, a rare note of genuine respect in his voice. You died as you lived, unbowed. Perhaps that, at least, would have made our father proud. His grip tightened slightly on the skull. But you were wrong about one thing, I will not fall as father did. I have the power to enforce his vision, to make it reality. The planet's death throes accelerated, great chunks of its mass beginning to tear away into space. Emperor Thragg launched himself skyward, the Grand Regent's skull held securely in his grip. He accelerated to speeds that made light seem sluggish, leaving behind the dying world as testament to their final confrontation. The universe had room for only one Thragg, and he had proven himself the stronger. Not just in body, but in vision. Now it was time to show all realities what true elevation meant, even if he had to burn away the old to make room for the new. But his counterpart's final words echoed in his mind as he flew through the void. Remember that, brother, when those you elevate turn on you, as they did, father.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.